I am.
All right.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Quick review of our objectives today. We're going to be reviewing groundwater demand projections and potential impact of groundwater resources. And then we're going to discuss, select, and prioritize our water management strategies that we began last time. So that being said, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Ken, second.
Ken.
Win. All in favor? Say aye. Any opposed? All right, great. Minutes were distributed. Hopefully all of you, or at least some of you, have had a chance to review those.
I did. I got a couple of just small edits, but it was just random stuff. So
Great.
we're good to move forward.
Okay, that being said, I'll entertain a motion to approve those.
Well, we need a first. Dean, right?
And Dean. All right, all in favor? Any opposed? Great. All right. Do we have any newsworthy items before we begin?
Just a couple items. There was a water SC listening session on Tuesday in Columbia. Did any of you sign in virtually? Listen, no?
No.
Like we did. John did, that's right.
And Courtney?
Good. And Jacob's, Joey's son Jacob was there and spoke. There was 11 speakers. Good representation from ag. I think you had at least 4. Brad O'Neill spoke as well. Brad's got some training he's doing today, so can't make it. Actually, I think he had 5 ag folks speak. A couple from PD, 2 from here. There's some public water supply representatives spoke. I think 8, 9, or 10 almost of the 11 speakers were actually council members from the different councils. And I would say the third to half of the 40 or so people in attendance were River Basin council members. So it was good to see representation from the River Basin. Several of them spoke to the importance of water SC, using all the information and recommendations that y'all have developed in their deliberations for developing the state water plan. So that point I think got across as well. Do you have a comment? Any other, for those that listened online, any other comments you want to make from what you heard?
I would say that water SC is grounded, no pun intended, by the work that the river basins have been doing. And so that they're headed in a useful direction, seems to me.
Good. All right, any other questions about that? The next water SC meeting next Thursday. I think they're going to be working to talk about policy, legislative, regulatory recommendations that they can get into the surface water report that's due at the end of the month. Because there's only really one meeting to talk about it, I don't know if we're going to come to a lot of consensus, but we'll see what happens. And if he has started to prepare that report, and it's going to start circulating it to the water SC folks, I think maybe at the end of this week. At the earliest, so they're working on that, and that's going to be submitted by the end of the month. All right, I think that's it on water SC. Is Hoper Alyssa online?
Yeah, I'm not joined yet. No.
Okay.
As soon as they do, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Work.
Well, I'll mention
Okay.
the climate office is organizing and it's going to be putting on a drought tabletop exercise on Wednesday, March 5th, in West Columbia. They did this in 2017 and 2019. They couldn't do it during COVID, so this will be the first time I think in 5 years that they've done one. The drought response committee members, including is Brian online?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, Brian's. You're going to be there, right, Brian?
Yeah, I'm planning to attend.
Yep, and Lynn, are you maybe?
Maybe now, because I'm not sure if I'm gonna stay on drought committee or not.
Okay, yeah, Lynn, by the way, is moving positions from Barnwell to Wellington, right, but still going to be representing the public water supply sector. And then we have 1 or 2 others on the drought committee.
Well, I was part of the 2019 one. It was really good. We were on the planning team. And so they basically exercised the Drought Response Act and looked for gaps. And just get people in the same room to talk to each other because they're the ones who are going to have to respond. So it's a good exercise.
So y'all have representation, at least in Brian and maybe Lynn, that are gonna be at this, but if there's any others, and Hope suggested there may be room for at least one other RBC representative from each council to attend this. If anybody's interested, reach out to Hope Zell. And
Melissa Griffin.
or Melissa Griffin, and yeah, I think you'll have to RSVP, and I don't think they put the RSVP out yet. They're working on information to distribute now, but if anyone's interested, reach out to Hope.
Do they have a time for the?
It's an all-day thing, so probably 9:30 begins, maybe 4 or 5. Okay, that's all I had for announcements and newsworthy items, except one more. I want to do this at the beginning of the meeting rather than at the end. I sent out a request for dates when we could reschedule the SRS tour. Those are the folks that responded to me. There may be more of you that are interested that just didn't have a chance to respond, but based on the feedback that I got, it looks like Wednesday, April 2nd, which would actually just be the day before our April 3rd RBC meeting, is one option. April 22nd appears to work well too. I would lean probably more towards April 22nd, not to have two things back to back. But it's up to you all. What does April 22nd look like for you all that didn't respond but are still have interest in going?
Surf Day,
Sure, Day, okay,
Arbor Day.
Arbor Day. Well,
Today was 22nd, it's a Tuesday, right?
Tuesday, yeah, yep.
Maybe better for me not being the day before the
Right,
regular meeting, because I would wipe out 2 days and Sunday.
I felt that probably the same for a lot of people, so. I think I'll work with Bob at SRS to schedule that day, if that's okay with everyone. You will have to do what we did last time, which is submit a security number, whatever other information they request to pre-register. I'll resend information about that once we get the date set in stone. But just have to redo that. They get rid of all that information right after the so we'll go with April 22nd. Okay. Public and agency comment. Any members of the public that are present or online want to make comment? And I mentioned we have a couple guests in the back room from a Warehouser. Y'all want to just introduce yourselves?
Oh, I'm David Scott. I'm with Warehouser. If you're not familiar, we're a pine reforestation nursery over closer to Aiken off the road. So we just use all of our irrigation water is groundwater. So it's all of this Jimmy's agenda items and was just interested in digging here.
Any agency comment? Okay. All right, let's move forward. Just a quick rehash of what we talked about at our December meeting. Remember, we were reorganized a little bit and started talking about policy, legislative, and regulatory recommendations so that we could get those to the Water SC group for their consideration. And we settled on a handful of recommendations dealing with policy and legislation. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but we will revisit these, maybe even beginning next month, when we start talking about our full suite of recommendations, technical and planning process recommendations. We had a couple recommendations that we put into a parking lot. One had to do with focusing on collaborative planning with Georgia. One about discussing whether there should be a difference between registrations and permits, or if it should just be all one system. And we wanted to make sure we had ag folks in the room to talk about that. We didn't have representation at the last meeting, so we postponed that discussion. And then somebody mentioned that there'd be a distinction between small ag and large ag operations with regards to planning and or permitting. So Those are in the parking lot. We'll revisit those probably next month when we pick up our discussion on a full suite of recommendations. Any comments or questions about what we talked about last month regarding recommendation?
I just wanted to clarify the third one. That was family oriented ag business versus large corporate ag business.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't remember the discussion specifically, but if that was it, then we can make that distinction and we can pick it up again.
I remember that too, Don, that's what we were talking about, it's more, it was a corporate versus small family.
Right. That was a common theme actually in the discussion of water, or the comments of Water SC about the multi-generational farming and family, passing it down. I think most of the speakers were representing multi-generational farming.
I think it's in the minutes from last time, documented well, so that it's in.
Okay. Okay, with that, Scott, are you ready? Yeah, we're gonna start with Scott. Brooks running a little bit, he should be here. Scott's gonna start with talking about how DES did the demand projection methodologies. And then that's gonna feed into Brooks' presentation on whether impact based on those future demand projections.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm here to talk about the methodologies we use for the water demand projections. A lot of this work was originally done by Alex Pellet, who's actually Dr. Pellet now, who just recently got a PhD from Clemson. And he has moved on. He's no longer with DES. So me and some other staff have taken a little crash course in water demand projection work over the past several years. But I think we're getting up to speed on it pretty well. So if you remember, I think it was last March, Dr. Laljit, I can't remember his last name. Thank you. Had presented, Clemson had a role in developing some of these projections for a short time. He gave a presentation back in March, and it did give a lot of this information I'm going to give today. I've left out a lot of the background information that he and Dr. Pellet had presented in the past. That tells you how these were developed. There's a methodology report that was published back in 2019. And there was a number of meetings we had with various stakeholder groups to get feedback on our projections through the years as well. And so the previous presentation documented some of that, but I'm not going to go into those details right now. But I did want to start out with this slide, which was shown last time, just talking about the difference between forecasts and projections. At least that's the way we see it. Forecasts are educated guesses based on expected conditions, whereas a projection is often an extrapolation of the trend based on hypothetical scenarios, what if type scenarios. Time frame for a forecast limited by predictability of future conditions, aim to be accurate. So there's a snowstorm coming in the upstate this Friday. So there's a lot of people probably want that forecast to be accurate because that's going to involve closing of schools and things like that. So you want those type of forecasts to be accurate, and those are short-term forecasts. Our projection, we're really extending beyond the limits of effective forecasting, aims to be informative. We're not saying we're predicting the future, but we're trying to provide what if scenarios. If this happens, then we could expect this 30 years down the road. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So the basic projection methodology we use is we do this for the major sectors in the basin of water use. We take a measure of a baseline demand and we multiply it by a driver variable. It's driving some type of growth in that sector. All right, now I'm going to be looking at 3 different projection scenarios based on different combinations of that baseline demand and, of course, its appropriate driver variable. And for what we're doing the state and other basins so far is that our baseline demand, we take 2013, 2023 reported water use data, and we find the median water withdrawals or water demands, and the median monthly water demands, and the maximum monthly water demands as determined from that database. So that's how we're defining our baseline demand. All right, so the 3 scenarios, the next 3 bullets. For the moderate projection scenario, our baseline demand is based on those median values. And then we apply a moderate, or sometimes we call it a business as usual growth rate for the driver variable. All right, and this projection scenario was used in our surface water simulations, okay? The next scenario we're looking at is the high growth projection scenario. Again, we use monthly median values, but we apply a more aggressive growth rate in the driver variable. All right. We did not use this in the surface water simulations, but I've decided we do compute these when we develop these projections. It's computed alongside these other two, and it's just there for information purposes. And I'll point out some reasons why I thought it was important to show later on in the presentation. And then the high demand projection scenario, which is used in our swam water simulations, and which would be used in our groundwater simulations if we were doing the groundwater modeling component. This is a baseline with this that's based on the monthly maximum withdrawals instead of the median withdrawals, and also assumes an aggressive high growth for the driver variable. So this high demand is really, it's almost an extreme case, really. An upper limit of what we would expect to happen as far as future water withdrawals in the basin. All right. I might just ask if there's any questions on this right now. Is this kind of the foundation for everything going forward? Yes, sir.
What's the geographic basis upon which those are based? Is it the basin as a whole, or is it sections of the basin? As an example, the growth rate, for example, on Hilton Head and Beaufort County is significant. Jasper County.
Yes, so
you go. So up the various stuff, we've got a completely different section.
Next slide. We'll get into how the growth rates were decided upon and what we used, okay, by section. All right, so that will come a little more clearly. Okay. All right, so driver variables, public water supply is obviously population growth, and it's going to be based on county population growth rate. Manufacturing industry, we use economic growth rates as determined or estimated by the EIA, Energy Information Agency. And in thermoelectric power, we use electricity production, but as you'll see later, and Brandon, you can tell me if assumptions have changed, but right now we don't plan on any new energy facilities in this particular planning basin. So those are kind of flatlined going forward. Then agriculture and golf course would be based on irrigated acres. And again, if you remember, golf courses, we're not projecting growth as either. Okay, so just keep that in mind, but we are for agriculture. All right, so I'm going to go over some of the assumptions for each one of these sectors. All right, so for population growth, or public water supply, we're using population growth. And this is kind of go over how we're defining our baseline demands. If you remember, I said we're basing our scenarios on or median monthly withdrawals and maximum with monthly withdrawals. But we're actually for public water supply, we're actually turning that into a per capita rate. Okay, so what we do is we take our historical withdrawals, billions of gallons per month. That's the top plot. And then we have an estimate of the total population during this time period. All right, we get that information from the Safe Drinking Water Information System lands. Do I have that right? SIDWIZ, is that what we call it? All right. Which is an EPA database that does have some population served by public water utilities in it. So we take that population out of that, and then we just divide the total the water demand by the population to get a per capita value. So you can see what that looks like at the bottom graph there. So again, this is not residential per capita or residential volumes, because those withdrawal volumes include some commercial, some industry as well. So we're still getting a per capita rate out of it. All right. So then what we do is we take for that 11-year period, 2013 to 2023, we just have it all plotted by year on here for each month. And the blue line represents that median value I've referenced, and then the red dotted line represents that maximum value. So for the moderate scenario and the high growth scenario, that blue line is our baseline demand that we start with before we start projecting it forward. And then for the high demand scenario, that red line is the baseline demand for public water supply. All right, so here, this is a dated slide that's not updated through 2023, but what this is saying is I've looked at my period of record, I've come up with my monthly medians, my monthly maximums, and if I applied it to the next year, that's my baseline demand on the right. The red is the maximum and the blue is the median value. Okay, so then we take those demands there and we project, determine our population growth, and we multiply that population growth by that volume. All right, so how do we project population? Okay, there's a number of assumptions made here. Okay, We, for the moderate scenario, we take data from the South Carolina Office of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs. They do projections through 2038, at least the last time I checked, it was through 2038. I think every couple of years they'll extend that out. So we just take their projections through 2038. And then after 2038, counties with a positive growth rate, we just extend linearly or extrapolate linearly. And then for counties with a negative growth rate, because there are a number of counties in this thing. Number of counties here where the growth rate is negative, but after 2038, we set those counties to 0. Okay, we don't extend that negative growth rate out further. And then for the high growth and high demand projection scenarios, we take the for all counties lower than the state average growth rate, which is 0.83%. We set those counties equal to the state average. So every county is getting bumped up significantly. And any counties greater than the state average, we go ahead and we're more aggressive and say, let's add 10%. So we're really projecting a high rate of growth under these high growth and high demand projection scenarios in terms of population. So you can see, counties like Aiken and Beaufort, and that's just where a lot of your population is. You can see how they're growing there. Some of these more rural counties, it's hard to tell on the scale. This is the same Y scale here, by the way. You can see the blue line is kind of the reported use for each one of these. And then that orange line is the high growth, the green line is the moderate. So you can see like short term, some of these are declining, then it flat lines into the moderate, and then there's some growth rate for the high growth scenario. Any questions on this? Is that clear? A lot of assumptions built into that. Any questions on this part? Okay. All right, so what about manufacturing? As I mentioned, we take economic growth rates from the U.S. Energy Information Agency. These growth rates are cast in terms of dollars, and we assume that any economic growth is going to translate into additional water use at the same rate. Got to make a lot of assumptions in this work, okay? So for the moderate projection scenarios, we just use their projections for each industrial sector in the basin, okay? And I'll have a slide that shows those sectors and industrial users coming up. And then for the high growth and high demand, if the sector growth rate is less than the national average of 2.1%, then we apply that national average to all sectors. And it turns out in this basin, all the sectors are below the national average. So they're all bumped up for the high growth scenario. Now, obviously, again, making a lot of assumptions here. Even with the economic growth, we know a lot of manufacturers are getting more efficient with their water use. And also, a lot of manufacturers developing higher value products that may use less water or not as much water. And one thing we haven't considered in our projection work yet is the hot button or hot topic item of data centers. There's a lot of interest in some of those across the state. And even with the data centers and the water they need, there's also energy needs related to that. So I know a lot of power companies, and Brandon, you can weigh in if you want, are probably adjusting some of their plans to account for additional energy demand from manufacturers like data centers. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and kind of the big picture, we've got 3 different facilities right now that we're adding what we call peaking units, which are natural gas fired. They don't use a lot of water, but in a nutshell, it's almost like a jet turbine, really. But just to help these peak demands meet those.
Okay. And so we haven't really accounted for those yet, but we also, it's kind of hard to count for them because we don't know exactly where they're all going to end up going. We don't know what source they're going to be used. We don't know if this is going to be a basin likely to come into or not. Now, I've heard that there is a new one or a recent one in Aiken County. Again, is that? No, I've heard that, but
There's chatter about that and then connecting to the Breezy Hill.
Okay,
There was a
but
newspaper
it's
article about
not in place. It's just.
No, it's not in place, but it's planned.
So there's a lot of uncertainty about where these plants will go. And so if we wanted to look at the impact of call it manufacturing, but we're calling it data center manufacturer, that's what the category they fall under. It'd be more of a what if scenario, like if you're doing a modeling exercise, either with surface or groundwater. You say, what if we had added a data center here or here? we could look at and we assume how much water they're gonna need, we could look at the simulation results to see what kind of impact they would have, or what impact maybe they wouldn't have. So it's really more of a scenario. We look at it as a separate scenario in simulations is how I would look at it. All right, so here's a table of the growth rates from the EIA office. You can see the various sectors there. Most of them are 1% to 2%. There are a few that are negative, but this is the table that's, you know, you can get this all online. And these are the numbers I pulled for our sectors. And here's a list of industries. I'm not talking about industry, by the way. I'm talking about self-supplied industries. So these are ones that report to us, DES, their groundwater withdrawal volumes. Okay. So you can see we have few different sectors here: paper products, chemical manufacturing, miscellaneous, plastics and rubber products, and wood products. Under the moderate scenario, we're just using the percent growth rates, economic growth rates that was shown in that previous table. And then again, as I said, if they're below the national average, we bump them up to 2.1%. Right, as we get more aggressive growth. All right, so agricultural growth rates. Dr. Pellet did an extensive review of looking at irrigated acres historically in the southeast and try to determine what are some good estimates we can use going forward. He said he landed on 2 studies. For the moderate scenario, he used a source by article. I believe these people, U.S. Forest Service, along with some professors, I think in Colorado State. I meant to look that up to get that right before I spoke today. But they looked at historical irrigation nationwide, including the southeast. And Alex determined that there'd be a 38% growth rate over a planning horizon. If you extrapolated some of those trends we've seen that come out of that paper, that turns out to be a 0.65 average annual growth rate. Okay. So for the high growth, we wanted to be a little bit more aggressive. And so we used another source. These are from the Department of Agriculture. They look at some climate change models, an ensemble of those, and try to tease out how much more irrigation do we need based on different future climate conditions. And he took I think he took a 75th percentile out of about 12 or so different models to determine that there would be a growth of 44% over the 50-year planning horizon. That turns out to be an average annual growth rate of 0.72. Okay. Now, it should be said that we've seen in the state much faster growth rates in irrigated area from a number of different data sets. And Dr. Folks work with that. I'm not going to show you that here today. But so we think the 0.72 and 0.65 are reasonable. We've seen probably growth rates of 6 to 7% over the past 10 to 20 years in irrigated acres from the data we have. We don't expect that type of trends to continue. So we felt these were reasonable starting points for us here. All right, so thermoelectric, golf, mining, and other categories, we're not projecting any additional water use from these, but of course we still have to define a baseline demand for them. And again, just going back to my first or second slide, for the modern high growth scenario, we're using the monthly median demand for these users, and for the high demand scenario, we're using the monthly maximum demand. Okay, I think I mentioned this earlier, but maybe I didn't. But for thermoelectric power, what we typically do is we'll talk to the power companies in the basin and try to get an idea of what their plans are. Are they planning any expansion of power plants, any additional power plants? And so we really base a lot of our projected thermoelectric water demand on the feedback we get from them. And I believe the only place in the state we've gotten any positive growth is with Duke Energy and the Broad Basin, right, John? They wanted us to consider there's probably going to be a new plant in the upper part of that basin.
Yeah.
But as far as any other basin, I don't think we've got any solid feedback on or any definitive feedback that's going to be new or expanding plants. So I expect that to change in the coming years. But right now we're not seeing. We see things in the lower Savannah-Salkehatchie. We're not seeing water demand for thermoelectric to increase over time right now. All right, so
But Scott, I got a question
Yeah.
about that. In terms of, we talked about a little bit of this last time. With Plant Vogel being on the other side of the Savannah, and that affects the lower Savannah.
Yes,
How do we get that information involved in this side of it? I know it's in South Carolina, but how do we get
Yes,
that
that's
information?
a good point. Obviously, everything I'm showing here is the South Carolina
Right.
side of these basins. Now, John, I know for SWAM, but Plant Vogel, water use was put into the model, I'm assuming. So we're accounting for their current water use. But no, we're not currently accounting for any future growth. And that's something to think about, to look into. It's a very good point. I don't know, Brandon, you know any plans on the Georgia side for additional plants in this basin?
I'm aware of Jordan.
Yeah, I played Vogel's about as big as, yeah, they're talking, when I went to their celebration, they said, number 5, let's go for number 5, they said that in the celebration.
How many more billions of dollars will that be?
I'm just telling you, I heard the governor say it. So,
Bill, how much in that plant, do we know how much is returned or is all of it evaporated?
it's, so they take out a certain amount, about a third is evaporated, and the rest is recycled.
Yeah.
And so they don't return any, and so eventually all of it's, goes. It's I guess consumed from the river basin.
So it would be 100% consumptive.
Right, it doesn't return to the river at all, so I think it returns to the Atlantic Ocean, that's right.
I didn't realize we operated that way.
Yes, about a third of it is evaporated and the rest is circulated.
Okay.
So I think that's more important than anything ever to think about that side of it.
Yeah, I think it would be good to reach out to our counterparts on the Georgia side to understand. Now, did we take water demand? I'm trying to remember with SWAM, did we take the water demand projection work? Incorporate, so it would be embedded in there if there were. So actually, we may have accounted for it. I haven't looked at the numbers.
I don't remember the numbers either, but we did use they didn't have a moderate and high demand projection, they just had a projection, and we incorporated their general projection into our moderate and high the same way.
Yes, so we may have accounted for any additional.
Because are they using everything out of the Savannah? They're not doing groundwater?
Also.
All of the Savannah? Okay.
Well, for that Vogel, yes.
Okay.
All right, so now I'm gonna present some of the projection results, and again, I'm just focused on groundwater here. This is Lower Savannah-Salkehatchie Basin combined. I do have in the blue just reported use for 2022 and 2023. 2023 was 72 MGD, and then I have 3 scenarios projected forward. The green is the moderate, the orange is the high, and that little dark red is the high demand. And you can see by 2070 for the moderate, we've got 91, which is about a 26% increase. For the high growth, it's 110, which is about a 53% increase. And for the high demand scenario, 168 MGD, 133% increase. And so the reason why I wanted to show all these 3 together is because I just want you to realize that under the high demand scenario, we're starting from the get-go that we're using monthly maximum demands as our baseline. And again, is that realistic? Probably not. But we wanted to get sort of extreme upper limit case. All right. So you can see immediately we're already using a lot more water here. All right. And but the red and the orange are growing at the same growth rate. Okay. Just keep that in mind. This high demand is really upper limit. Okay.
It's more likely that it's gonna end up at 168 and come up more gradual. That's the more likely case. Then
Well,
it's obviously not gonna go in
it depends.
2025 to that, but it could end up at 168, but it starts lower and
Possibly, but also depends on your climate, like how many droughts you're having, how long the drought you have. That's really what that's going to depend on. In 2025, you could have a situation where you have a bad drought, and yeah, your demand's real high. That's what it comes down to. But as it grows in time, and then you have another really bad drought where you're using maximum demand, that's when you start getting up here potentially. But year after year, you're probably not going to be pumping this much water, right? I mean, hopefully you're going to have a good year still, right? Anyway, so looking at it by sector. Yes.
Do we have any kind of realistic estimate of the amount of water that's being pumped by people that are using less than the permitted We're permitting and accounting for water pumped by folks that are using less than X gallons, pumping less than X gallons per month. Do you have any kind of an estimate to add into that about all the people that are using it, all the rural houses, septic farms, everything that's scattered around that aren't subject to the permit?
I don't have a good number for you now on that. I know Dr. Pellet had tried to do some investigation into that. And I don't remember the conclusions. Do you remember, Brooke, some of that?
I don't, but we can look into that,
We
because
can
that's,
look into
it's a big uncertainty when we talk about this, because there's a lot of use, and you can see it in hydrographs that there's small irrigation, domestic supply that, create, variability, that we can't account for with just permitting alone. So, it's something that we can look into and report back.
Leanne, y'all haven't done any work regarding that yet. And I think. If you may investigate this problem, maybe not South Carolina, but other projects you've been involved in, right, John, where it does seem to be a pretty small percentage of the overall water use.
Yeah, so nearly every RBC's asked that same question. Some of the RBCs have actually put forth recommendations, a future study to figure out, is that a significant amount? Can't remember which ones now, but one of the studies I did was in Wake County, where I live in North Carolina, to quantify what that basically domestic and small uses that would be below what the reported amount is to get a permit. And in Wake County, it was somewhat significant because there's 200 some small public water supply systems that are groundwater fed. You add all those up, and it's a significant impact on base flow to streams and other things like that, especially during drought. But I think it's very location specific, whether it's important in this basin or not, don't know.
So that might be a recommendation, this group to maybe look at that a little bit more critically. I see the question now. Yes.
But it'd be nice to look backwards and say, if you 10 years ago, 20 years ago, projected these kind of models on how accurate, has it been? If we look backwards, was it accurate? And I can tell you, I bet it's not 100.
Well,
you're not even close to the high, I bet, but I'd like to see how accurate it was looking backwards.
Yeah, well, that would be an interesting exercise, and we do plan on, if we do set of iterations as planning, 5 years down the road, we'll look at, well, how well are we doing here? We totally missed the mark, we need to tweak, or maybe we're spot on. We'll see, but yeah, that's a good point. We plan on doing that as we go forward in the overall water planning process.
Yeah, I know during this methodology development, Alex did look at some of that stuff, like the SRS site, some of that to see if it was close or not, and it was pretty far off, but.
It was pretty.
Yeah, but I think some of those older presentations may have some of that.
Okay, we may have tweaked some things.
A couple of the slides.
That's a good question.
So, question on the agriculture, right? So there's got to be studies done in our basin of ag land coming in or out of service, right? Are people putting more ag land in the service that's irrigated, or are they putting less? Because that would then tell that demand. I can understand the population is subject to development and development approvals, but it seems there should be some trends on agriculture and what's going on in the state, particularly our basin. Are there?
Right, and you can use land use change data that's to determine some of that. And there's various surveys that farmers participate in over the years where they that's self-reported. So how much do you trust some of those numbers? I don't know. But so there is some surveys out there that shows how irrigated acres are changing over time in the state, and Dr. Pellet did some work with that. I'm not prepared to present any of that today necessarily, but there are some data sets to get at that. And that goes back to, remember, we're assuming that 0.65 and 0.72 growth rate in irrigated acres for moderate high. That goes back to, we're actually seeing much higher rates than that over the past 15 to 20 years. It's just that we don't expect those trends to continue that fast, and so we used to lower numbers. So yeah, we looked into that some, and if you think that's more, some more information that should be presented and discussed in the group, we can do that, probably just not gonna happen today though. All right, does that help? Okay. All right, so looking at it by sector, public water supply, you can see the numbers here, how it grows. Agriculture, again, you're starting out with the high demand scenario already jumping up, and what this shows is that because irrigation is so dependent upon droughts and climate, the difference between your median withdrawal and your maximum withdrawal over your baseline period can be really large, right? Right. Yeah. So that's why we see such a big difference there. So a lot of that, if you go back one, a lot of that change right there is made up with agriculture. That's why you see such big differences there. Okay. Industry. I'll also point out these are the largest users in the basin for groundwater. Okay, public water supply and agriculture. So if you go to industry, start at 3.7 MGD, and depending on your scenario, you're going from 4.5 into moderate, high grade 7.5, high demand 8.5. This is the growth in manufacturing. And then if you recall from golf and thermoelectric, I did not project growth over time, but we still have to pick the median monthly withdrawal volumes and the annual or the maximum withdrawal volumes, but they stay constant over time for each one of those scenarios. In groundwater demand projection, I don't know, Brandon, if that's one you y'all have a well y'all use for something on site, or if that's some other small facility somewhere, but it's not very much.
Yeah, most of our stuff code runs with well, but that's one you're working with conjunctive usage now to revert back to surface. But everything else,
I don't know if it's like a potable water supply.
it's going to be guard jacks or maybe maintenance building or something like that.
Okay, and for the golf courses, I think maybe you talked Alex allowed you back in, but you were comfortable with not projecting growth. You guys. Is that a comfortable assumption? You guys are getting more efficient with your water use, for sure. Yeah. I don't know how many new golf courses are being built. I don't think there's a ton of them.
Not many, 5 across the state in the last 10 years.
Oh, really? Yeah. So good assumption. We can say that's a good assumption. In that.
One more yes. Question. Do we have this information? Are we assuming for our basin that all this water is coming out of Florida?
No, no, we are not. And Greg, I don't know how much detail you're going to go into about. Yeah, so kind of the next presentation, but look like that a little bit more where we expect this water. Yeah, this is just any groundwater withdrawal. I think that's my. Oh, yeah. Sorry, one more slide. I showed you the planning basin wide projections. You can also break it down by county. So you have the counties listed there. See a lot of groundwater use in some of these counties like Aiken and Allendale, Beaufort, and when we're projecting, future groundwater demand, and I'm dividing it up into these counties, we're assuming that the current water usage, baseline water use rates, house proportion among the counties. We assume the projected use is going to be, at least in this table, similarly proportioned the same way in the future as well. But in reality, say future irrigation, maybe there's more irrigable land in Allendale left than Bamberg. So you might expect a little bit more to happen. That future used to be in Allendale instead of Bamberg. That's just an example. So one of the key things about using this information to go into a modeling exercise is you have to figure out, okay, well, where's all this new groundwater withdrawal coming from? Because we don't expect it to. Every well that we use for irrigation, we don't expect you to just use that same well. It's going to be a new well in a new unirrigated area somewhere, right? That's how it's going to be done. But where are those? So at some point you have to take this information and decide, okay, if I'm going to do a groundwater modeling exercise, where am I going to put this new water use at? And so you have to find out, well, where are some areas that we think are likely to be irrigated in the future, or it's possibly irrigated in the future. Look at all the constraints in the basin. We know there's urbanization going here, probably not going to be new farms here. There's public land that offers constraints too. So you got to kind of find within each county, like where you think new irrigation is possible. Those are the places you can put new water use. Okay, but we're not doing that modeling exercise this time around, so that'll be an exercise for another iteration plan. Yes, sir.
Just a clarification. On the bottom, it says all values of million gallons per month.
per day.
But you've got MGD indicated.
That's a typo. Thank you.
It is per
Million
day.
gallons per day, my
Per day.
That's a typo.
There's no groundwater
Thank you.
from Edgefield here?
Not enough to be recorded anyway.
In our basin, I guess. That's just a portion of Edgefield in our basin.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah,
that?
you can- the county tables here are
Okay, yeah,
just
there's a lot of
portion of
things.
the counties in the basin too, by the way. And just did want to point out something with no, I guess I did. Oh, this is ground, not surface. So I was going to point out that the surface water projections, Jasper's really high, because that's where Beaufort's intake is, Beaufort Jasper's intake is, where Beaufort looks a little bit smaller. And if you don't understand what the intake is, that might look a little funny. So, but we're dealing with groundwater stuff, that doesn't matter here, so sorry. I think that was my last slide. Any other questions before we dive into Brooks? Clear as mud. Any feedback or anything you think we should tweak, we're welcome to do that. So don't hesitate to ask any more questions or offers.
Something that I thought maybe was missing, and I don't know how you go about, it might just be a what if scenario, but you did manufacturing growth and on public supply, you did population, but what about economic development that could occur and cause additional demand on public water supply? So not those manufacturers that are gonna drill those own wells, like maybe a data center, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
Because there's manufacturers that use public water supply.
Right,
Yes.
so, but it may not be represented by population, especially in a rural county like Hampton or
Yeah, so-
Cornwall, where you could have a large industry make a significant impact on that public water supply demand.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and so I don't know if that's something that,
And so, you know, when we're projecting the manufacturing growth, we're using the existing industries.
Right.
That's a big assumption on its own.
new industries,
Yeah, the industry that comes
who
in.
draw on public water.
And so we are assuming that the water use is gonna grow at the same rate as your economic growth. And where are they gonna use that water from? Is that gonna be from a public water supply? Or are they gonna dig another well and rent it? We don't know. But that's a good question. Yeah. So any suggestion how we could, and again, it might just be scenarios, like the day or some other water users, what happens if we put big water user here? What is it like for water availability on groundwater model? So probably that's another way to say it.
All right. All right, thank you, Scott. We need to load up Brooks' presentation, so we'll do a 10-minute break. And then we'll come back. It's coffee in the big room over here, right? Yeah, everybody wants to, they're right up there. 48, we'll start back up right before 11 here.
Used to do it. Now say.
Brooke's gonna speak next. Brooke's gonna build off of the information Scott presented, and she's gonna try to talk about what the impacts of those projected demands might be on the aquifer. And she's got a lot of good maps to talk about that. This is kind of a way to start the discussion. I think the goal of today is for you to digest this and then say, what other analysis or information do you think you need to see to help select water management strategy? And that's what we're going to start talking about after lunch and after Brooke's presentation. So digest your information, figure out what other information you might want, what other analysis you might want, and we'll try to come back in February with that information. She's taken a lot of information in a short amount of time, trying to distill it down and make it useful, given that we're not going to be modeling. I think she's done a great job. I haven't seen all the slides yet, but I'll turn it over to Brooke.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Okay, so what I'm gonna try to do, it is exactly kind of what John said, is this is a first cut, high level look of the obvious issues and users that stuck out to me when I went through the data looking at this past 20 years of data. So a lot of times we've been looking at these from a 10-year perspective. I wanted to back up to 20 years so that we could look at 20 years of aquifer use. The permitting office or our permitting group has said that the reporting is, better starting at 2002. We have data that goes back even farther, but I wanted to chop it off there, so just to reduce any of the uncertainties that we see. So we've shown this, let me see. Okay, we've shown this a time and time again throughout this process, but this time I'm showing groundwater and surface water. Groundwater and surface water are both important in the basin, not showing energy here because the surface water energy consumption is so much higher, but it obscures some of the groundwater here. It looks like there may be kind of a downward trend, but what we see here is 2011, the very large surface water user dropped off in 2012. And so we have lower use. So, but generally kind of, moving along, we want to see, are we going to have enough water? Are we going to continue this trend? Is the trend going to go up? And now this is looking at all of the water use, groundwater and surface water in the basin. So, what we need to do is kind of parse it out. So the way that I've looked at this is right now by county projections and then some by aquifer projections, because we want to distill that information down to the aquifers. We have a lot of aquifers here in this basin, and everyone is pulling different amounts from each one of these aquifers. And so we need to understand what we would have done with the modeling is to go aquifer by aquifer to identify where potential problem areas would have been looking at future pumping scenarios. So hence our groundwater evaluations for this iteration of planning is kind of outlined like this. We're going to look at this historical and current reported groundwater use. And again, I'm looking from 2002 to 2023. Utilize our South Carolina groundwater monitoring network. We've shown, we'll see. Here, we've got like 75 wells, various periods of record tapped into every single one of the aquifers. Also utilizing our National Groundwater Monitoring Network well data, which is from our potentiometric mapping network, where we don't have good resolution in these baseline wells that have continuous records. Sometimes we have periodic measurements at wells that we use in our pot mapping program. Also using potentiometric surface maps. For this particular presentation, the only two maps that we're able to use is a pre-development map and the most recent map. We need to work a little bit more with our GIS capabilities to produce some more maps. And so, like I said, this is a first cut looking at overall change, and per y'all's recommendations, we can drill deeper into information as time goes on. Also using the low country and western capacity use area groundwater evaluation reports. They do an evaluation, the permitting side, the evaluation every 5 years to look at, evaluate the permits, who's using the water, when's water being used, and to evaluate how much water is being used per user according to their permit limits. There are some recommendations in each one of these reports. I will just give you a little spoiler that in these two particular capacity use areas, there haven't been a lot of specific management regulations that have been placed, with the exception of Beaufort and the upper Florida aquifer to abate that saltwater intrusion to slow it down. The Low Country came together in 1981. Hampton came in, added to the Low Country in 2008, and the Western capacity use area came in 2018. And so I highlight that because the reporting, especially in the agriculture, changes in some of the counties when the Western capacity use area came about. And the Western capacity use area includes all of these counties above Hampton and Colleton County. Finally, we're going to use the groundwater demand projections to estimate where we're headed. So the idea with this desktop approach analysis in lieu of a model is that we can estimate the potential for impacts in the groundwater resource based on reported groundwater use, aquifer level trends, and the demand projections. So it's a good start. Whoops. Okay, I've shown this again. We're going to come back to this because we're going to start with the 2023 reported withdrawals from groundwater. We've got a really wide spread of groundwater wells. These are all capacity use area wells. So this is all permitted water use. We acknowledge that there is a lot of other water use, a lot of wells, a lot of small irrigation, domestic, rural wells that would not be included in this, but that's, as we talked about, something that we can explore further. Yeah, oops. So, looking, here, up here, you see that surface water and groundwater, excluding that energy is a 48-52 split within the basin, so it's an important resource. This presentation is primarily gonna focus on groundwater, but I have added some surface water information in here. Our largest, sector of groundwater use is water supply, followed by irrigation and industry. And then golf course, thermoelectric, aquaculture, and other. They're not going to be included in this presentation. Going back to Scott's presentation, we're not really seeing declines. And so in sake of getting information out to you today, we've chosen to focus on those particular sectors. I will note that, water supply is pretty common throughout the entire basin. Agricultural supply more in the mid-basin, some golf courses down at the south, and some more industrial users over to the western side of the basin here. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on here is this public water supply, agricultural irrigation, and industrial supply. So here we're going to be looking at everything in a million gallons per day for the most part. And I want to show that this is 2002 to 2023. The public water supply, Scott talked about how it's driven by population. We have Beaufort and Aiken are going to be part of this analysis to look at water use trends historically and where we may be going. Agricultural irrigation is projected to increase across the entire basin. So what I've noted here, though, is you can see that it kind of upticks in 2018, and some of that could be the result of increased reporting due to the Western capacity use area. But there's definitely some variability here that we see that I can't explain exactly right now, but this would have to do with hot climate, droughts, or wet years where we would use less. Now, industrial supply, while it does appear to be trending down, we do have projections that it would be increasing. And so speaking to that efficiency, that may be the result of what we're seeing, but I'm including it in this discussion. And note the access on this industrial supply is very different compared to the access on these two. So it's a smaller amount, but what I want to show with the projections is that it could have a 1% increase. Yes.
We know the population increase in public water supply on those years, what it was and what it ended up being.
That's not included in this, but this is.
I mean, it just seems, because it doesn't seem like it's much of a trend, but yeah.
It doesn't seem like I mean, there's probably a bit of an upward trend, but this is full basin. So I mean, we're looking at the entire basin here.
No, I understand.
So it would be interesting to look at that. And so that's why I wanted to give a presentation like this so that we could take these questions and then look further into it.
Same thing with number of acres.
Correct, yes.
What it was and what it is now. Because water efficiency, maybe, I don't know.
Water efficiency or like the demand side, management, the crop rotation, that.
Yeah, so water utilities and basically what you include, it might be a little bit different picture on the but statewide, even nationwide, there's kind of a flat line for public water supply, water withdrawals, since about that economic downturn. And I typically will bring that up in a lot of meetings, public meetings, when we first introducing this process. And I've talked to utilities about it, and even Charlotte flatlined for a while. So big cities too, but utility people I've talked to said those gains you got from increased efficiency, maybe better conservation, I think they're starting to wane, and that most utilities expect those demands to go back up.
Yeah,
is that accurate?
I think the trend of water efficient fixtures, like past 25 years nationwide, at indoor water usage.
Oh yeah.
And price.
Huh?
And price.
And price.
Because it's got to be a factor, not be a factor it is on the equivalent.
I had a question for Ag. Was there a point where everybody switched to pivots and then that could be a kind of a bump and then it's not going to change a whole lot?
It wasn't much speaking from anything with other two pivots. We had few travelers on some drift, but drift is actually for on vegetable, mostly in vegetable, multiple crop, and if they got him up, if they start from new ground, okay, they're not replacing the pipe here. That would.
Those were those ideas, so does it all happen kind of?
It started in the late '70s when it really got started, it really hard in the early 2000s because of the price was high. People wanted to kept him on income. It really was from 2005 to 2015, it really was time to put in your day. You could afford to put in. You can't afford to all even farm out of that. That was like this year, we had 150 days. If we had 3 rain. 10 inches, 8 inches, and 13, and it only happened in a day. About 50 days apart. You know, so we were wet for a week and then dry for 4 in between each one.
Okay. Okay, so how I framed this is I've looked at, and I'm not expecting y'all to read this, is the largest groundwater users. I used a 5-year average from 2019 to 2023, and these values are actually in million gallons per year. This is not this is total water use. This is the only time I use this statistic here. So the top water users come out to be, you know, no surprise, it's water supply, irrigation. Beaufort and Aiken using groundwater the most for water supply. And then in Allendale, we've got some irrigation farmers, also Hampton, Colleton. So what I wanted to do was look at which aquifers are these people pulling from, what's the demand on the aquifers, and to try to parse out, to look at from an initial top cut of how much water is being pulled out of the aquifers, and if you can see any past impacts here. So we could look at all of these, but I just chose to look at a few because you can get really, you know, long looking at hydrographs and that. So here we have a map. This is the 2023 reported groundwater use by aquifer basin wide. And so these the aquifers are color coded. Remember, we've got 6 major aquifers that we're pulling out of here. And then the size of the bubbles are in million gallons for the year of reported use. So the larger the bubble, the more the use. And we've got them color coded. So the upper Florida and the middle Florida kind of represented by this red and orange. The Gordon is the lime green. The Crouch branch is the teal. The Crouch branch and McQueen branch is blue. The reason why I stuck those together is because we actually have a lot of wells that are screened or cross-screened to both aquifers. You know, obviously probably to maximize productivity from those wells. It's not a practice that the permitting office would like, but this is the data that we have. And then finally, the Grambling is in purple. So a lot of middle Florida, you know, obviously in the lower portion of the basin, because the middle Florida, while it goes up farther, you know, very productive here. And then a lot of Crouch branch agricultural wells here in Allendale County, and then we've got some water supply. And so the presentation is gonna follow through is that I'm gonna kind of go by aquifer, and I'm going to look at these specific counties with their projections, and then I've kind of picked out, I've used the bulk agricultural use in the county. I haven't pulled it out by particular facility, except for a couple cases, just to move along the conversation. I'm going to show this map over and over again, so it won't be the last time you see this map. Okay, so I have shown this before, but I want to start, you know, the upper and middle Florida aquifers. We've got pre-development 1880s here on the left, 2021, our last created map here on the right. We currently are wrapping up our 2024 measurements of the aquifers, and then we will have a map at the end of the year for that. So we map the upper Florida and the middle Florida aquifers together because they have very minor head differences. And I've shown you all before that when we have two wells that are sited, coincident, you can see that they track within about a foot of one another. The aquifer is primarily used for agriculture, water supply, and golf course irrigation is secondary. Pumping centers at Hilton Head Island and then off that in Georgia at Savannah have shifted a natural gradient that we had in the aquifer where it used to discharge off to the ocean towards the southeast. And so instead now we're pulling those contours along towards the lower pumping center over Savannah, Georgia. And in our state, we have a 10-foot differential across Hilton Head Island, which has pulled that saltwater intrusion from the very high, unconfined areas of the upper Florida aquifer found in Port Royal Sound down into the aquifer in, of course, Savannah. The water levels decline since pre-development have been about 25 to 45 feet. And most of that is concentrated here in the southern portion of the basin. Oh, these are the locations that I'm going to focus on looking at water use. Pushing the wrong buttons here. All right, so I'm gonna frame it up with looking at how past water use potentially caused some declines in the aquifer and some impacts, detrimental water quality impacts. I showed this graph before. Hilton Head really started pumping in 1950s, and pumping increased. This is the upper Florida aquifer. We got water level below land surface. We got water level reference to NAV D88, which is going to be the elevation data that I'll be using throughout. At this coast, it's pretty much synonymous with sea level, but as you move inland and towards the upper part of the state, it starts to get farther apart. So we brought everything to a similar data. So groundwater use continued to increase until about 1990, where groundwater withdrawals were at 14.5 million gallons a day. This is specifically on Hilton Head. I'm not talking about the use in Savannah, but they were also upping their use. So what's happened is we've created a cone of depression centered over Savannah, Georgia, and it pulled these contours and reversal of flow. So now instead of water moving this way, we have water moving this way, and it's brought that saltwater intrusion. So this continued until 1998, where the groundwater was capped at 9.7 million gallons a day. And this is really the only true management action that I saw when reviewing the capacity use reports for our basin. So as an RBC, you may identify other areas that we need to watch or make recommendations, either supply side, demand side, to not see any kind of declines in each one of these aquifers.
What does that mean? And why?
What here?
Yeah.
So these water level declines, saltwater intrusion has started moving across the island, and that would be another data set that we could bring in. There were this report down here, this is USGS report, but that where this came from talks about the rate that saltwater intrusion started moving, and how lessening pumping stress on the upper Florida aquifer would slow that down. But we know that the gradient has shifted, and even if they stopped all of the pumping today, it'd still be kind of creep across. And so in order to slow that down, that groundwater use was capped at 9.7. I don't know exactly what methodologies went into that, but that's something that we can look into.
So my basic question on all these aquifers, because it's, I think the mission of the group is, we're talking about withdrawals. So what's the supply of these aquifers? Do you measure there's zillions of gallons in there, and this is how much you can take out without, degrading whatever, and, based on the cycle? I mean, how do you know what the supply of these aquifers are? And how much you can take out?
That's a tough question. So because the aquifers are large, they have They are not homogeneous, they're heterogeneous, so you have different transmissivities and clay layers that come in, and so it's not like just a big bolt of underground lake or an underground river where it's sometimes published in newspaper articles, but it's more, of a semi-consolidated rock that's saturated. So we can estimate a volumetric amount of the aquifers, but it's kind of, there's a bit of uncertainty, it's like a hand waving, and we could get those. I think we tried to do that one time, we had a question similarly, and Andy Walkup and I talked about this, and we came up with a volumetric amount within one of the aquifers, but I wouldn't trust it.
But here's my dilemma as an engineer, right, and sitting on board, we're here to task on quantity of water in basin versus demand. This is a groundwater is a quantity of water, and if we don't know the quantity, how do we know, if there's enough to meet the demand along with the surface water? Surface water is a little more straightforward.
Yeah, we host, that was what the groundwater model was supposed to help us kind of answer. What are the impacts on continued withdrawals or even increased withdrawals? How's that going to affect levels? And that was our goal from the outset, to be able to have that tool available. And I think we've gone through this, that it's not going to be available in time, it needs to be completed. Hopeful that we'll have a tool that can answer some of your questions you're asking in next iteration. That's all we'll do. Because right now, we're just trying to look at the data we got.
The model would have boundary conditions,
Figure out what else we can do.
the amount of recharge coming in and doing, the balances, and we can get there, but we just can't get there right now for you to
No,
facilitate.
Because essentially in layman's terms, it is not a pool that's stagnant, it's
No, of course.
constantly going down.
Flux.
So you
There-
can't,
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
leakage between confining layers, some confining layers are really confining, other confining layers are incomplete or leaky, or we've got, climate, different areas that are
You
getting.
could define it almost like stream flow during certain conditions, the aquifer has this much and other conditions have that much. You could, but it's really hard for the basin to determine the output of the question you asked at the beginning. Is there enough water supply to meet the projected growth?
Yeah.
I mean, that's my dilemma. I mean, it's not quality, it's just supply is our mission, right?
Correct, and so, and it gets at,
So go ahead, I just wanted to.
it's the supply side management strategy, so right here.
And I understand that piece, but you're saying even if they capped it at 5, it's not gonna reverse the flow of the saltwater intrusion.
No, and there have been models to demonstrate that, and there, I shared a little bit back in September when I gave the presentation. I had taken some information out of a project that y'all have worked on with Nutter and Associates, and then there's a USGS reports to indicate that, and within Georgia to indicate that even if all pumping stopped, we wouldn't be able to.
But however, I will say for the group, which I'm passionate about, if the state allowed groundwater injection to push it back like they have done in Orange County and other areas, there could be substantial process in preserving that aquifer and enhancing the aquifer.
Yeah, with aquifer storage.
Without interfering with quality of water at all.
Right.
But that's prohibited right now by the state.
Wait, what's prohibited?
Groundwater injection, which of recycled water or other, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna take fresh water. It's not gonna help supply. If you take recycled water like California's done. To protect their aquifer and push back the salt water, it actually can work, but in this case, you need cooperation from Georgia too, since they're drawing a lot down.
Right, but Hilton Head, and I've let Pete speak to this, they do use aquifer storage and recovery to take water from deeper aquifers of a lesser quality, treat it and shoot it back down into the well and to use it.
We do surface water.
It's also
Treated
surface
surface
water.
water protection of the ground. Yeah, I mean, that's what we've been talking, statewide. I think I've bumped something about our water reuse association, that's what we're trying to work with DES on now is, some legislation that would open up those kind of toolbox ideas, like what Kent's talking about, actual saltwater treatment barrier programs.
And yeah, we do not.
Yes, yes.
Two things. First, in terms of, Beaver Jasper has a fairly significant aquifer storage and recovery program, which they take surface water and the same thing that he does and inject it into the aquifer. And then they withdraw it. Are the withdrawals that they get and do from that aquifer storage and recovery program counted in the withdrawal numbers? That's the first question. In other words, if they pull, 20 million gallons out of there in a month, are those numbers recorded as a withdrawal? That's my first question.
So if you have an ASR well, if you are injecting, let's say 10 million, and then you're withdrawing greater than what you're injecting, you have to report that withdrawal.
Right.
If you are staying at like a net zero, then we don't say that. If you are withdrawing greater than what you're, yeah.
And number two, if you look at that chart, you can see the change that happens in around 2000 based upon the surface water project, which brought Savannah River water onto Hilton Head Island. And as a result of that, and the reliance then on the surface water for a substantial amount, ESD1 was the leader on Hilton Head Island to make that happen. You can see how that affected the withdrawal rates of groundwater like that, and have stabilized them fairly well since that point.
Right, correct. That was, yes, so that was my next, point. That in 1999, Hilton Head Public Service District started using surface water from Beaufort Jasper from the Savannah River. And that conjunctive use, that strategy has made it so that the aquifer levels have stable. Now, there is a lot of up and down, and that can be from smaller smaller irrigation wells, domestic supply, because those are very common on the island. That would be unreported, but you can still see there's fluctuations in the hydrograph. So I wanted to start here just because this is an example of where conjunctive use has been used to slow the rate of saltwater intrusion and to somewhat protect the Florida aquifer from any future declines. So okay, so looking at public water supply, and I've looked at Beaufort and Jasper counties. This is kind of harking back to the previous slide. Is where's the water coming from? So we do have a Savannah River Beaufort Jasper water intake on the Savannah River, and so for Beaufort and Jasper counties, 38% of that water is coming from ground, and 62% is coming from the surface. And so they've already tried to balance that supply with the conjunctive use strategy, and then looking at the hydrograph here of public water supply for both counties. So in public supply, the demand is going up, generally in the upper and Florida aquifers, and kind of stabilized in the Grambling. And so I parsed out just for these two counties that we're using 56% from the upper Florida aquifer, 38% from the middle Florida aquifer, and about 6% is coming from the Grambling out of that. So for these counties, that is the demand placed on each aquifer. That supply side management used to utilize that current demand. Like I said, conjunctive surface use, aquifer storage and recovery, and then reverse osmosis, because these areas are pulling less desirable water out of deeper aquifers, treating that through reverse osmosis, and then sending it out to the customers. Now, I did want to say here, if you look at this here, this 9.9 million gallons per day for both counties. This is some of this is off island use because that Hilton Head Island is capped at 9.7. And I did the math, and it's basically right at 9.7 is what they have been pulling. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of walk into the projections. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at the projections. I'm going to show you a area that we're going to focus on, and then aquifers that we're going to focus on, and then look at historical use, and then I'll leave it up to us to think about how the projected use may affect in the future, may affect aquifers. So this is by county. So this is the groundwater demand projections in the public supply. for Beaufort County only. In 2023, we've got 15 million gallons a day. And then we'll move forward, through these projections up to 2070, looking at the moderate demand, high growth and high demand. And I like that we've got this high demand scenario because it really is a conservative approach. It's the worst case scenario, perhaps, that we could see successive months of drought or excessive growth. And so that, if we can plan for these really high demand scenarios, maybe we fall below it, and so that we have some water to in case we do have some of these occurrences happen. So Beaufort County, this is based on population growth. Population is expected to increase. And so I'm going to look down here at the upper Floridan, the middle Floridan, and the Grambling Aquifer in these particular counties. This one example that I'm showing, this is from public water supply utilized by the South Island Public Water Services. And they use the Grambling Aquifer, the upper Floridan Aquifer, and the middle Floridan Aquifer. So from 2002 to 2023, the use generally looks, kind of flat, maybe some uptick here in the recent past to indicate that use on the Grambling has gone down, and so they're supplementing with more use from the middle Floridan. But what I want you to notice is that use on the Grambling kind of upticked until 2010, and then began to downtick after 2012 as middle Floridan was added in. I don't know what happened here in 2022, maybe a reporting error, and I can dig farther into that, but I noticed that there was no use represented for 2022 for the Grambling Aquifer. So looking at the same time period and looking at the upper Floridan and the middle Floridan, these wells are located on the other end of the islands. There is about a 10-foot differential between the location of the South Island wells, which is closer to Cordillo Parkway, towards the shoelaces of the island, if you will. And these are back more on the back heel. So what I see here is, pretty flat use. There is a wide range, which might indicate seasonality, but for the most part, the upper Floridan showed green, showed blue, and the middle Floridan showed black. They track very closely to one another. More drawdown on the middle Floridan aquifers seasonally, but this is a deeper aquifer that might not be quite as transmissive as the upper Floridan aquifer. So that's just what I want to show, is that generally very stable over time from 2010 on. I'm not seeing anything that would be startling. Now, in the Grambling Aquifer, I thought that this was an interesting observation. Now, the Grambling Aquifer, very deep, where this well is 3,708 feet. These are our deepest aquifer in the coastal plain. Very hot, 100-degree water. Very high dissolved in this water, requires treatment. A lot of pressure down there. So what I want to show. Okay, so we're talking water level above land surface. So if I pop that baby open, it's going to shoot 150 feet up into the air. So a tremendous amount of pressure. So I just want to note that when we're looking at these scales. So during the time from 2000 to 2010, when we were using, South Island was using over 2 million gallons a day, there was a pretty consistent drop within the aquifer. And then when they started supplementing with that middle Floridan aquifer, we see a stabilization. Still have, a tremendous amount of water. We're still looking at 128 feet of water shooting up from the land if I open it. But I think that this emphasizes how much use is the tipping point to start to see declines in an aquifer, and then how can we use conjunctive use to stabilize those water levels over time. Okay. So now I'm going to move up the basin and look at projections in agricultural irrigation. I'm going to stay in the same aquifer. So this is in Hampton County. Lots of little users. So there's some big users periodically through the basin, but what I see here is a lot of smaller, more concentrated agricultural use, so mini wells are making up the trends that we're seeing. Again, looking specifically at Hampton County and the agricultural irrigation, 2023, using 7 million gallons a day, and then seeing some steady increases under a moderate demand scenario. The high growth in the demand, we go from a 16% to 19% to 128% increase. 128% increase can be a significant toll on the aquifers, especially as we start to move up dip.
Brooke, just a question. on
Yes.
that past one. So and I can't probably see very well from way back here, but
I thought it would be bigger.
the map you're showing, it still shows all the different sectors of use, right? Each circle.
Yeah, okay,
is
so
still
what I-
color-coded?
Yes,
Okay.
these maps, what I want to show, and what I was only able to make one map for this presentation. And so it is all sectors, but what I've done is I've found users and locations that are represented here. But what I'm trying to do is just look at by aquifer. And so there is a lot of heavy agricultural use in this area, so I can go back and I can look at, whoops, this, this is representing this.
Okay,
So
so I guess the point you're making is that circle that you got on the graph we were looking at is mostly agricultural use.
mostly agriculture use.
There is water supply.
We needed more maps,
there's-
couldn't put them on the slide, yeah,
Okay.
but
Thanks. I didn't-
yeah, I understand what that could be.
I guess I want to point out, you're not singling out agriculture here, you're saying there's different uses here in this particular area, most of the use is agriculture.
Yes,
Okay.
well, I'm looking at an agriculture.
We're looking at their demand projection.
I'm looking at the demand projection in the agricultural sector in Hampton County, where I identified that there were a lot of wells, a lot of users, with a good amount of use in this area.
Now, that's upper Florida in there, right? I mean, you've combined them on the thing, but there's
So
nobody using untreated middle Floridan.
the middle Floridan water,
Does it get fresher?
it gets fresher as it goes up, yeah.
So there could be like some 600 foot.
Yeah.
Untreated. Really?
It gets-
Our wells are 500 or 600 feet.
And they're untreated.
So that.
Or more, 800 or 900, 800 or 900.
There's some Gordon wells too, yeah, you've got Gordon wells.
Lucky. Man.
Uh-huh.
Lucky man.
Yeah, more mineralization at the coast, ancient seawaters trapped in there, can be improperly flushed.
We wanna keep it that way.
And so it necessitates treating when you pull out through those hydrothermal solids. More limestone, actually down as we get down here and we transition to more sand as we move up towards the.
Yeah, so
recharge.
more confining layers.
Deeper,
Lower.
deeper confining here, less confining here, and then, when we're close to the recharge zone, you're getting that fresh water coming in from rainfall, recharge, or a runoff from streams or groundwater, surface water interactions that are fresh. Okay, so I have aggregated the agricultural irrigation in Hampton County. So this is, I am acknowledging this is a course evaluation, but I wanted to give you a first cut so that you see who's using the water from what aquifer where. Demand, again, looking at from 2002 to 2003, the upper and middle Florida aquifers are the primary aquifers here. Now, one of the things that I point out is that we have maybe we're spatially limited by the wells that are in our baseline network that have continuous data in some of these areas, especially in the middle of the basin. We have wells, but they might not all be on the right spot. And so part of our continuometric network program, we measure these wells every 3 years, and we put those to make our maps. And so this map right here was the closest that I could find. This is a Hampton 180, it's a middle Floridan well near the town of Estill. And these are manual measurements that we've collected over time. I just don't have long enough periods of record in our continuous data to go back to evaluate if there have been impacts. So this is a 300-foot well, the elevation is 130 feet. So we're looking, from starting here at
100 feet elevation, about 30 feet depth, it loses 15 feet of head over time. So, there's a lot of, variability here in, this graph, I'd say. Hampton became part of a capacity use area, so in 2008, the reporting got better. So that could indicate this uptick here, but there is a lot of variability, but there is somewhat of an upward trend. See in 2019 when we had that flash drought, and I don't know what's going on here particularly.
Wettest summer on record.
What is 2013? What is summer on record? So.
Was it the time I said still?
Oh, yeah, it did start raining in 2013, that's right, yeah. So.
I mean, it all rained at the right time. You can get
That's right.
some every week.
Did have, you did.
Not all in one week.
Not these days.
It does happen.
Yeah, not these delusions and rain bombs coming down and running off. So, what we can say from looking at this is that, water use in the Middle Florida aquifer in times, does affect water levels in the aquifer. And so, I think that this warrants, a deeper dive into the data to indicate, if we're gonna have a demand, of up to 16 million gallons a day in this area, we've never hit 16 million gallons a day. So, there could be potential for impacts. And so this is an area that I would like to look at more hydrographs, get better resolution. Also, look at some of our potentiometric maps that they go back several years. And for this presentation, we weren't able to export the maps in a timely manner. So we have more data, but I'm just going to show that this would be an area of potential concern. Not definitely, but potential. Here is a period of record from one of our baseline sites. This is at Lake Warren State Park in Hampton County. Now this only goes back to 2015. And the upper Floridan and the middle Floridan, the water levels are ranging from 20 feet below land surface to 32. And you see that seasonality of really well, a lot of agricultural wells around here. It does seem to recharge pretty readily, but it is affected by drought. So I would like to see a longer period of record here so that we could tie it to the water use data. Okay, so now I'm going to move to the Gordon Aquifer. So Gordon Aquifer, right below the upper Floridan and the middle Floridan, used to be mapped as part of the Floridan, called it the tertiary or the extended Floridan. There's a unofficial lower Floridan in Hilton Head. But we're calling it the Gordon Aquifer. So the limestone, high phosphates, sand, black mango, salt and pepper sands. So pre-development here, map showing discharge straight off into the Atlantic Ocean from the southeast, ranges to 300 feet up here near the recharge zone in the area of confinement. Just going straight off, maybe some interaction with the rivers here along like the Eddystone between Colleton County and Charleston County. And then the Gordon, like I said, was previously mapped the Floridan Aquifer. It's primarily used for agriculture, water supply, industry second, domestic, rural, public supply, fire station use in Colleton County. And that's what a lot of these dots in it, but those are unpermitted supply largely. So those are smaller users that we don't really have an accounting for how much there are, but there are a lot of wells in Colleton County, likely pulling water. And so what it tends to do is it tends to get more brackish as we get towards the coast. That's due to it being unflushed, and lowering the potentiometric surface, disrupts that natural balance of the saltwater intrusion. Saltwater, freshwater interface, which allows saltwater to creep farther in along the base of the aquifer. Water level decline since the pre-development have been between 25 and 45 feet to the coast, largely I think due to out of basin demand. And so all these contours are kind of curving down towards Charleston, and I'm gonna get to the Santee Basin. I'll talk more about that. Anybody wants to get into that one. So I'm going to look at a couple wells, one in Allendale and some used in Colleton County.
So groundwater projections for agricultural irrigation in Colleton County. So starting here, 2023 use is 3 million gallons a day. And by 2070, we could be at 6, 7, or 11. So we have 100% increase, 133% increase, or up to a 267% increase. These are the wells that I've chosen to look at here. True, they may not all be agricultural wells, but I'm looking at agricultural use in this area. So, looking at agriculture irrigation in Colleton County, definitely have seen, you know, a bit of a downward trend here. The Gordon is the primary aquifer, very small portion of the Floridan. We start to lose the Floridan, and there's some connectivity between the Floridan and the Gordon here. But then we're also using the Crouch Branch. Again, I pulled a well from our National Groundwater Monitoring Network. Near the town of Lodge, it's Gordon Aquifer well, 510 feet, elevation is 110. So we've gone from, you know, just 15 feet down to in 2004. Didn't have very good reporting, but we know in 2004 that it was quite dry. And then, you know, we've come up to, you know, 20 feet. So not a ton of change. And that's kind of what I want to emphasize as I go through these is that we don't see these huge drops in aquifer level when we look at use. And so I think that, you know, especially in these agricultural sectors, it warrants more investigation on our part to help understand that.
What's demand projection? Can you go back one slide? What could it go up to?
It could go up to 11. Here we are. Let's see. It's 7 if we're in a high growth scenario, 2070. And it looks like we hit 7 in 2013. In those, you know, result some of our lowest water levels. And so we can see that increased demand does affect it. Now, is it a disproportionate effect? It's still being recharged in this area. So it's more, it warrants more investigation, I think. But
Do you have monitored in that one, like on the island? No,
on what?
on the Gordon.
On Hilton Head Island? We do have one.
Really?
On Dalmatian Drive at that fire station. Yeah, but there's some questions about the well construction information there, so I think it's Gordon. But we do have Gordon wells in Labico, where the new solar plant is. And then there's one in Hampton in the Basin. So
Are those brackish and the weekend?
you know, I've never taken any water out of it before. I tried actually to get a probe in it and I drove all the way down there and I was like, all right, let's do this. Wait. And it got stuck. I was like, oh my gosh, the diameter of the probe is just a tiny bit larger than the hole. I was, you know, it was really disappointing. So I didn't get any sample. I wonder, we might be able to look back and see if there's any water quality information from that. Okay. I'm gonna move on to the Crouch Branch aquifer. Crouch Branch, so now we're moving into the Cretaceous aquifers. So these are the deepest, the Crouch Branch and the Cream Branch are the deepest aquifers, but our basin, you know, runs all the way up to these unconfined areas. And so we, you know, are getting recharged directly in our basin from this. So looking at pre-development, not a lot of information here to even, you know, suggest what the contour lines were when we get, you know, past 2 years. We don't have any wells in Hampton or Colleton and Jasper to, you know, to make that assumption. And even looking at our 2020 map, we don't really have any wells that we're using in the Crouch Branch aquifer. It's just typically few wells are permitted that we have access to because they're more productive aquifers that are shallower. So why would you pay more to drill into a deeper aquifer if there's good water above? But something that, you know, as we move through planning and thinking about water demand, you know, it could be one of the recommendations to increase that supply by drilling deeper wells where we don't have them. The declines are in the range of 20 to 50 feet since pre-development, but you know, even today we have very few wells to create these maps. So there's a lot of uncertainty here, but still
maybe we still have this southeastern gradient, no big change really in the aquifer, up here. So I'm gonna look at Allendale County and I'm gonna look at Aiken for the crop branch. Okay, another agricultural irrigation, assessment, I did do a lot of agricultural irrigation because we did indicate that was going to be a section that increased, so a lot of examples. So in Allendale County, we've got JCO Farms is located in Allendale, yes. Looking at our demand, 2023 was a 10 million gallons a day. 2070 we could be at 12.8 for moderate, 13.3 for high growth, 22 for the high demand, looking at respectively a 28, 33, or 120% increase. And we've got Crouch Branch, but we have other wells being used here, some Gordon Aquifer wells, there's some Middle Gordon Aquifer wells, but there's some Crouch Branch wells. But I chose to look at a Crouch Branch example here in both agriculture and industry. Okay, so this is agriculture irrigation in Allendale County. Over time, the Crouch Branch is the primary aquifer. The Gordon and the Florida would be secondary source for these users. Again, some really interesting water use in these. Maybe we need to look at that a little harder, but we do happen to have a continuously monitoring well there. And we see that there have been just, steady declines. It just continues to kind of drop down. This would probably be our aquifer that we're seeing the most impacts in the middle of the basin. And let's see, like in 2013, wet summer popped right back up, but then we've got, some higher use trending towards current day. And, it appears to go down. We've had that flash drop in 2019, flash drop in 2022. And so I think this is an area that we should focus on.
So again, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. But we don't know if it's a 2% impact in the aquifer or a 40% impact in the aquifer.
We don't,
Right.
No, but what we can look at is we can build transects in the data that we have and look at how the water changes in the aquifer as it goes down dip and kind of make some assertions about
Water quality, you mean?
No, it wouldn't be quality, it's all gonna be quantity for now, but
Because we just don't know if that trend's an issue based on what's down there, right? That's my issue. I mean, I can see the trend but it's not relative to the number of quantity that we can relate to, like the surface water is pretty easy.
Correct.
Quantify.
Correct, and that's where the model comes into play, where we've got boundary conditions and we've got the top and bottom.
Yeah, there's some complicated factors here trying to decipher all this information. It makes our job hard, right? Allendale Western capacity use started when?
2018. Oh, yeah, so we have increased reporting.
So increased reporting is part of that. So sometimes we can look at that plot on the left and see trends and feel pretty good about it. Sometimes you have to say, well, wait, we don't know exactly how strong the trend that is because of increased reporting. So we have to weigh that. And then even for these wells in this part of the state, you see these declines. I think you see it in McQueen too, right? Which you may show from the 90s, where we started a lot of. We have some long-term monitoring sites up there. The C sites we call them, which were part of the.
This is the C site, yeah.
Back in the day, right? And you see the 90s was a pretty wet decade overall. And so a lot of our periods of records starting into the wet period are coming out of the wet period. And so that kind of weighs into that decline a little bit too. And so you got to factor water use and longer term climate trends, because you have dry decades, wet decades. So you got to kind of put all that together and try to figure out what's going on. That can be really hard.
So yes, it can be hard. We do have some additional data that can be pulled into this. And so like with those potentiometric maps, some of these sites have historical manual measurements that go back for many years before they were actually added in. Might not be at this particular site, but
we can look at that and, you know, they go back when we, our maps kind of start in 98, well, like I start in a wet period. And we have some maps that go back into the 80s. But the issues that we, you know, have as uncertainty is the spatial resolution of wells that we have to measure. And so, you know, as we move forward, we get more wells, hopefully, and better information. So, yes, we can.
I think one thing Ken is asking, maybe, Ken, tell me if I'm wrong, is, you know, if, for example, that well continues to decline, at what point is the decline a problem? So, you know, one way you can look at that is say, okay, well, at 30 feet of drawdown, you're starting to de-water the aquifer. You're getting portions of the aquifer that don't have water in them any time of the year, and that could actually cause problems. The aquifer compress, right? It could lose the ability to transmit water like it used to. If you completely de-water the aquifer, that's even more of a problem. You could get land subsidence. You could lose yield from the aquifer. So I think one thing Ken is suggesting is that, you know, wanting to know at what point should we be concerned with some of these drawdowns? Is it, you know, another 40 feet, which we're not even anywhere near, or is it, if this trend continues in 10 years, we might start to see some of those impacts?
Sure, yes, okay, so we can go back and we can look at the hydrographic framework and to see where those aquifers are. When we start to pull water levels down below the top of the confining unit, we start to introduce really big problems. So we have room for the water level to come down. We might not see any impacts. We might have issues where users need to lower their pumps, which is never, you know, a great option because that costs money. But as to permanent detrimental harm to the structure of the aquifer system itself, that, you know, thank you for bringing that up. Let's see how far we have to do that. And that is something that the model kind of would have done for us, but so we can take to a desktop, we'll have to calculate that down.
The only one we know is the first one where the salt water's been moving in, and that's why they stopped pumping at a certain level.
Yes, that's why I chose to kind of start there to show management strategies that have been employed through regulations and by water operators to protect the resource, to meet the demand and the growing demand for customers and that need that water. So yes, noted. Let's take a better look at this particular area.
Brooke, have we seen any subsidence anywhere?
We're not actively monitoring it in relation to groundwater withdrawal. The subsidence that's occurring is very near coast. And a lot of that is associated perhaps with sea level rise. The South Carolina Geological Survey has a very extensive surface elevation tables network that they are monitoring, looking at the elevation of the marshes. But to my knowledge, there haven't been any published studies in South Carolina to suggest that we are subsiding due to groundwater extraction. There was a large USGS study data release several years ago to indicate that the near shore is definitely subsiding. And there have been a few studies, but I don't think that we've made any real conclusions and come out and said, no, we don't know if Georgetown is subsiding. And that would probably be our area that we could point to on a map, a giant cone of depression. But as of now, we don't have any measurements of it. Something that I think is worthy of studying. Yes.
Do you know like the sea level rise projections?
Well, I know it's like, what, 3.18 millimeters per year right now. In Charleston, it changes depending on where you are on the coast. So sea level rise and groundwater extraction. This is a topic that I've talked about a lot in the Charleston area, and it may be more pertinent to your area. So worthy of looking into, because the aquifers are so deep in Charleston and sea level rise is a bit of a disconnect, but the aquifers being exposed at the surface and having an absent confining layer in the Beaufort area definitely could be saltwater intrusion could be exacerbated by sea level rise. Yeah, we have a lot of questions today. Okay. Okay, all right, so industrial supply, also looking at Allendale County, there is a chemical manufacturing plant here, so notably I'm kind of looking at that, but there are some more agricultural, industrial supply areas in Aiken, but I just chose to look at Allendale for the purpose of this presentation. So industrial supply projected to grow. Now, this demand is pretty small here. But in 2023, the 1.4 million gallons a day, projecting out to 2070, you're looking at in the moderate 2, high growth 5, and high demand 6. Now, these are small increases, but a disproportionately high percentage increase. And then as coming back to what Scott was saying, we don't exactly know kind of what's coming, how future industries, data centers would be plugging in to our water. We know that they can be quite water heavy. So we want to include this and acknowledge that we have a lot of industries wanting to come to South Carolina. And so we want to have that information at hand. Okay, so this is going to be looking at the Crouch Branch. Industrial supply in Allendale County. Crouch Branch primary aquifer, Gordon and Floridan are secondary aquifers. Looking at 22 to 2023, 2002, there is, a decline in water use, and this could get at the efficiency of these plants. And the focus well that I had to this was again this C10. I don't really see too much of a match here, but I wanted to at least show this to you to indicate that we are projecting an increase in industry and something that we should include in our plan. Yes.
Next user. Is it just one user now?
It's our Chroma.
How close are they to that well?
It's fairly close.
Okay.
Fairly, that not close enough. Not close enough. Our one of our weaknesses, and I think I've kind of hit this several times in this presentation, is we just don't have enough wells in the right locations in the deeper aquifers in the middle of the basin. Maybe we need to drill some more wells. Maybe we need to identify some wells that are about to be abandoned that are in our target aquifers, so that we can start to collect that information so that we can estimate those impacts in future.
So that would be a reasonable recommendation from this committee to suggest that in terms of well monitoring, we ought to become a lot more scientific about where we have what wells for monitoring. We need to drill wells specifically for monitoring. We ought to do that.
Yes, and we do that, and we are currently working on drilling a well in Lexington County as a direct recommendation from the exit planning process. We're going to put in a well cluster, hopefully we'll be next week. So a great recommendation. We always like to collect more data.
So we'll need you to tell us conceivably where you think those wells ought to be and the aquifers they ought to be monitored.
Do that. I like that.
We also use any feedback on, we can give the general locations we want, but it's very difficult to find land where people allow us to drill well.
We need to find
So
public lands.
It's not, we can designate an area, but trying to find a place where like a public piece of land or a school or something that we can drill a well and getting approval, that's just really hard. It's really hard process.
And recently we've had really good luck in baseball facilities.
Yeah, right. So just, I say that just to, like, if you know we need wells in a certain area and potential locations that might fit, we're not.
Yeah, let us know.
In this area. That would be helpful, is all we're saying.
Yeah, I had a question about this example. Seems skewed to me a little bit. So
Okay.
an earlier example, we had population growth in Allendale County. It was negative, and so we flatlined it.
Okay.
We have one plant that's tends to be going down. But then if you go back a slide, you have goes from 1 to 6. So what happens is it's sort of saying we have a problem when everything else points that we don't. And so I just think it's not a good example to sell the story.
Maybe it's not a good example. I wanted to include it because we were projected and I didn't want to be, remiss and say I should have.
We're not saying there's a problem here, right? We're just.
I'm not saying it's a problem, I'm just,
But except that you show the well is going down. Well, why? not this. This isn't the
Yeah.
cause and effect. And so when I just think about it, it doesn't.
But she also
make
said
sense.
it wasn't very close, I mean, this is the closest well she had.
And it's
So,
like-
You know,
it could be closer to irrigation.
I'm just saying it's not a very good example for someone who would say you're wrong. Because this would be a
Yeah.
place that they would attack. So,
Well, I have a good example. On my property, there was an artesian well that had, it's 6-8 feet. Had to be capped, probably shot up 5 feet, and now I've got a head pressure of about a foot, a couple inches. It's not because of water use in the area, it's because the aquifer has been drawn down by probably Savannah, right?
Yeah, or, yes, use lower.
So the other issue we have is it's not necessarily our use that's causing the aquifers to be drawn down, could be a neighboring state,
It just,
right?
I'm just saying that as an example, because when you tried to sell it to me, I said. I know where the plant is, I drive by it all the time, so it's not,
Okay,
nobody lives there. So.
Let's get one.
delete slide 25, okay. Alright, so, I agree, I thank you for noticing that, and I appreciate hearing the
It's just,
feedback.
it's a lever you don't want someone to pull.
Correct. Okay, I'm gonna look at the, I got just a couple more slides, McQueen Branch, Charleston, Grambling aquifers. Pre-development, to 2022, our most recent map. Primarily used for water supply and industry. Up here in the recharge area, you know, we've even got like water table conditions, and then we have a groundwater divide where we actually have water that kind of discharges out to the Savannah River. Very few wells make up both pre-development and our 2022 maps. So there's very few wells permitted in the coastal counties because, as I said in the Crouch Branch, that there are more productive. There are productive wells at aquifers at shallower depths. One exception is that we do have this Grambling well that is located in Hilton Head Island that I showed yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to clarify, it's speaking of the Grambling aquifer, so before we used, there was no use in the Grambling in 2022 for that one slide. And I got confirmation, it was because that well had a casing collapse.
Oh.
We're doing, purely, yeah, so, and
Top Islands are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, perfect, okay, so. No, there was no use for that, okay, thank you. No use for 2022. We've seen minor declines, updip since pre-development. There's a general southeastern gradient, moving off to the ocean, and they're gonna show. I've already shown this example, and so what I'll do next is I'll look at the Aiken example for water supply. Groundwater projections, public water supply, Aiken County. So looking at the county. 2023, we had 12 million gallons a day, looking out to 2070, in a moderate high growth and high demand, 13, 19, 22 million gallons per day respectively. We can see up to an 83% increase. A lot of these wells up here, there are a lot of dual aquifer cross-screened wells. So some maybe somewhat difficult to parse out the information right now, but we can dive deeper into
So
that.
Brooke, how do you account for the data that you get from a well that is drawing from two aquifers?
This would be something that the model would take care of. What I did do for the case of the model would do is, I have not been able to do this right now. We have some of the data that we could try to parse this out, but it would take a lengthy desktop approach exercise. Is that we have the screen intervals, and then we know that they're open to two aquifers, and then we use it in model, we use the transmissivity values of each of the aquifers, and then the portion of the aquifer that is completed as is the Crouch Branch, and then we've got this much McQueen Branch, then we take those two values and we scale it, and then it would be added to each. This goes to the Crouch
And
Branch.
it just adds to the uncertainty.
It adds to the uncertainty,
At
and
the end of the day, that's what it does.
yeah, so one of the recommendations that,
Yeah, so current, and I'll just make this clarification, so yes, there are wells that are cross-screened, but in in the capacity use reg and in our evaluations, we do not allow for newly constructed wells to be cross-screened. So any new well that is constructed for withdrawal should only be screened in one, yes,
Statewide.
well, capacity use area.
Well, coastal plain wide.
Yes.
So yeah, that is a recommendation that is
Well, it's in our regulations as well, like that's already something we do not allow.
so these are older
These are
wells.
older grandfathered in wells, but any newly constructed well in the coastal plain is not, we do not allow them to be cross-screened. And when an application comes in, that's part of our assessment is to ensure the proposed well diagram is showing only in one screen.
Okay, I don't drill, but when was the change made? What year?
I can't remember what year I believe the most up-to-date version of the groundwater reg is back around 2000.
Oh.
But the well regs include that standard, but I'd have to look up what that was.
It's a big question when it's enforced.
Yeah, because part of it is, the coast, past use areas, they were established in different times and, some wells were being put in before.
Well, the reason I asked you, you're talking about my backyard, yeah, so.
Yeah.
Just trying to help.
Sure.
Understand it, so.
But yeah, now with every coastal plain county as part of the capacity use area program, we're not allowing the construction of cross-screen wells.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we're looking at the Crouch Branch and McLean Branch aquifers for Aiken County Public Supply. In some cases, in the permits, like I did in the Hilton Head example, is you can look at the individual wells and see what each individual wells are permitted, because sometimes in a permit, there's multiple wells. So we can parse it out that way. I did not do that here, so there could be wells that are solely completed in the Crouch and solely completed in the Queen Branch that we could get a better estimation. But then again, there are some that are completed in both, and we do have some data that we would need to calculate but we didn't get to it at this point. So, okay, public water supply, 2002 to 2013, maybe an uptick, here, a little bit of variability. I can see times when it was dry in 2019, maybe it was, more public supply, used, maybe more, irrigation, commercial irrigation, or, just, more water use from these aquifers. The Crouch Branch and the Queen Branch are the primary aquifers with the mini screen wells. Aiken also utilizes a conjunctive use surface water from Savannah River. And so that's, another supply side management action that they use. I don't have those numbers for you here today, and I need to speak with our permitting group. There was a little bit of confusion in the data there to understand that.
You said the Savannah River?
Is it, well, or should be
Shaw Creek.
Shaw Creek. And it's significant, it's not a minor.
Yeah, and so I purely ran out of time to parse that out, so. Here I've used information from a well in Aiken, maybe not the closest well, again, but we can see that we had that very wet 1990s followed by a period of dry, and then we've actually come back up in recent years in both the Crouch Branch and the Queen Branch aquifers. Here in Aiken County, we're really close to the fall line and really close to both of the areas where the aquifers are being recharged. And so when it rains there, although these water levels are very deep, it is still getting recharged. And we can see that, especially, since it started, to get kind of wet. And now we have another downtick here. We've had some drier summers. But this is the case, but also just like to reinforce that they are also supplementing the surface water, which could meet the demands and future demands of the communities that are relying on it. Okay, so some general observations, that the current demand and the aquifer levels are generally stable in all the aquifers. There are some declines that we've associated with drought conditions, areas where we've seen an uptick in water use, and a decline in water levels in nearby wells. And that's a lot happening in the middle of the upper basins. And then in and out of basin demand, at the coast, have affected some of the aquifer levels in like the, upper Florida and, middle Florida and Gordon aquifers. So the largest water users in the basins, are public supply in Beaufort-Nathan counties. The demand is expected to increase in both of those. So, the supply side management strategies that are employed, should be continued in my opinion to both, meet demand of the growing population and to keep that saltwater plume, moving at a slowest rate possible. Agricultural irrigation expected to increase, especially in the middle of the basin. But as I've shown through this presentation, that we don't always have the best available wells and locations to indicate that we may see declines. But I would, in my opinion, this would be an area that we should watch, especially getting into the Crouch Branch and deeper aquifers in that area. And then industrial supply is expected to increase in Allendale counties. It's a very small volumetric increase, but a large percentage change. And maybe we could look for some better examples of closer wells, but I wanted to include it because it was something that was projected to increase. We can also look into Aiken County and see if we see some maybe different trends. Now this is a first cut, and so what I'm seeking from y'all is your input on the work that we've done and what do you think that we should do more. And we've got the capacity use area reports. Like I said, look into the recommendations that have been put out from the permitting group and use those when developing supply side and demand side management strategies so that we'll have water to plan for over the planning horizon. Yes, ma'am.
And we can send out the ones pertinent to the basin if y'all are interested.
Those
evaluation reports.
The most recent one for the western capacity use area was based on 2023 use, and then for the low country, the one that I have is for 2021, but I think there's a new one.
It will be coming out, next year?
Next year, okay.
Yeah.
So, but we also have a whole lot more geometric maps that we can look at, different time steps going farther back in history. But I'm open to y'all's suggestions of where we should go next. And how to move this forward as best we can while we wait for that model.
Question, and it's not, it's a lot of time. Is the state doing anything at this point? DES only, in communicating with Georgia about the water use in Savannah and the pumping that's going on in Savannah Metro, and some of the projected demands that is out there. I know there's an automotive manufacturer that's building itself up in the Savannah area. Has anybody done anything about trying to come to grips with the relationship that what Georgia's doing is affecting us?
We had a discussion in the upper Savannah with the Basin Council meeting yesterday about that new car plant, and its impacts on the river. And I don't know when anybody been talking about that, but I haven't had any formal conversations with anybody about that. It seemed, I mean, you maybe summarize the conversation too, but it seemed like there was, it's a notable withdrawal, but I assume some of that water is going to be returned. I think it may be more of a water quality and TVL discharge, the 5R plant type of issue might be the bigger concern there than the extra quantity. But that intake is, downstream here. Not water that's excuse, but it could be water quality more issue maybe. Is that like something else?
Yeah, so I think what Tanya, the Savannah Riverkeeper, mentioned yesterday was that there was a long range plan for the Hyundai plant to tap into the Savannah River, and that got moved up. So now they're going to go ahead with planning to put an intake on the Savannah to help meet their demands, in addition to what they're going to be pulling out groundwater. That's the context that was brought up yesterday. Don't know when that's going to happen. It was going to be 20 years in the future, but they said, no, we're going to go ahead and start working on that now. there's no intake yet, there's no pipe yet, but they're gonna pull water from the Savannah, and it wasn't a huge amount, what was it, 12 LGD or something like that, it was. Considering the releases from Thurman, it was very small, and she was more concerned about assembled capacity during drought and other things, not really about water quantity issues or availability. The groundwater impacts from their withdrawals is a different issue. We didn't really talk about that.
Well, the issue we've got is basically that the city of Savannah and the Savannah Metro historically has withdrawn all of the water that needed, particularly for the downtown area. They've been converting everything north of 95, and all that is now in surface water. And they're trying to get surface water out into the islands and out beyond it. The state tried to do a deal and develop a program with Georgia 25 years ago. And I was part of that process, which essentially blew up in everybody's face when our governor changed, and he was going, Sanford was governor, and there was a relationship that they were trying to build there with the pictures of them exchanging neckties on them. So,
Is that a science initiative?
That's not science initiative.
but it does seem to me, just speaking from the lower part of the state, that that's something that the state ought to be trying to actively pursue. Trying to develop relationships so that, particularly with groundwater impacts, because unless something's done, that groundwater, other depressions there, it's just going to keep salt water moving all the way through. Fussie's going to go under.
I might add that I'm involved in a Richmond Hill project right next to Savannah. We live with 200,000 people, undyed battery plant, all kinds of stuff there, and that's just I'm sure that's going to be groundwater. So we're going to add to that.
Yeah. So it does seem to me that I'm going to make a suggestion as we go forward in terms of what our recommendations ought to be, that we encourage the state to move forward with its relationship with Georgia.
I think that's great.
Well,
Yeah,
that's our base in the boat.
If we've got,
That's a recommendation last cycle, last meeting, so.
Yeah.
Where it's good, it has to be.
yes,
Both states are aware that each one, we have counterparts in Georgia that know we're doing planning and have continued some of the meetings. But there's communication, but there's nothing, you want to have a formal sort of
Based
multi-state planning approach instead of just everybody around style.
I want to basic contact between the two states. Which was suggested 30 years ago, it never was able to get.
And that's about not. But I know I get the sense of that. I think we need something like that too.
we, just to note, thinking about that, and I may have mentioned this, in the last meeting about, specifically addressing saltwater intrusion and water declines that, in 2021, we facilitated moving that gauge that was a dolphin head that had salted over, long time, and just had a very, very consistent trend of being salty, and we moved it to the Busky Island. And so it's been there now for about 4 years, and I check it, I checked it just the other day, and we're definitely seeing increases in the Florida aquifer. And so I think that it was a really good move to right there, so it could add some.
That's USGS.
It's USGS, and
We paid-
we paid for it, but we facilitated moving it there at Hay Point. It's giving us some really good information, water level, and specific conductors to indicate the movement of that saltwater plume that had been tracked. Yeah.
So our lunch is here, I don't want to get cold, we'll bring up.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. We'll pick up this discussion before we get into water main, chapter 1, because I'm going to ask you.
What time do you?
12:45, I think. 12:45. Yeah, if you're online, we'll try to start around 12:45. Good work. Okay. So before we start talking about water management strategies, I want to finish the discussion about groundwater. Brooke mentioned that she can come back in 3 weeks, because our next meeting is in 3 weeks with more information or a different type of presentation. So my concern Zach Brook had a lot of information there. This is the first time you've seen it. We haven't even sent it out before. So one thing we'll do is send out the slides after the meeting. But I recognize the difficulty of trying to digest what she just went over at a meeting like this and then saying, okay, you got that? We're going to pick water management strategies. Impractical. You're not going to be able to do it. We're kind of making this up as we go, right? We're trying to figure out how can we make this meaningful without doing groundwater modeling. So the information that Brooke has presented is a start to that. One thing I want you to remember is that DES does do groundwater management plans, right? There's capacity use areas. They do groundwater management plans, and they do every 5-year groundwater evaluation reports. So they're doing what Brooke kind of done here. The only thing, the difference is that Brooke's looking at our projected demands in our different scenarios. So she's kind of saying, what if a high growth scenario occurred? What would how would that impact? Would some of these trends continue, would it go away, whatever? When DES does the groundwater evaluation reports, they're just looking at historical data, recent historical data, longer back in time, but they're not looking at demand projections. That's what's unique to this process. Well, that's the only difference, right? Say that because I think we can rely on what DES has done for the capacity use areas, groundwater evaluations, and the every 5-year groundwater management plans, and then the fact that they reissue permits every 5 years, right? They're managing the resource, right? So part of those groundwater management plans, they're identifying strategies like ASR, conjunctive use, and other things that make sense. So that's already in place. What we're trying to do is sort of use a crystal ball and say, what other strategies do we really think are going to be needed in the future? And the one and Ken keep talking about, like the groundwater barrier wall, is a great example. It's specific to Hilton Head, but that's a good example of something that may be needed in the future. So I don't know if that helps you understand what your charge is. There's only so much time we have and technical capacity to be able to digest all this information that we're providing. Do you want more information to be able to reasonably select some strategy, to put some strategies in the plan? Or as what Brooke presented today, kind of enough? Do you want her to distill it down to a bigger picture and say, here's the areas that DES recommends we focus on? What would be the most of use to you all?
Are we compartmentalizing our strategies based on the types, the sectors? So like we're sort of on the recreation, we're going to do public, we're going to do ag, such.
So for the demand side strategies, that's how we've typically done it, because ag has completely different demand side strategies than public water supply for the most part. And same thing with the industry, but there is overlap. For supply side strategies, a lot of them are similar. Yeah.
If we agreed on goals or objectives, seems to me that if we're going to have a strategy, then it has to be tied to its very specific objective, the more specific the better.
Yeah.
About how we surface water, management strategy, groundwater. So the idea would be to keep the groundwater resource at a level in a situation where it continues to be a reliable, quality related supply for the predictable future, something like that.
Yeah. So that could be a good way to approach it. You could say we're going to recommend some strategies with this goal in mind. Maintain groundwater availability. Do not dewater any aquifer. Do not, point out what you don't want to do. And then you can identify some strategies that, depending on the area, the aquifer, the sector, could be used to help meet that goal. And that's certainly a way to approach it.
Well, I would almost say that we need that study done so we can quantify, because we can say that, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but does that do anything for quantity of water, which is our mission? I'm not sure, it's just nice words, because nobody wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to de-water road, but I think we can recommend with that study be completed expeditiously, that will really help complete the model for South Carolina. Because without that piece, how much of the basin is groundwater supply? 50%? 60%?
About half, yeah.
Yeah, and that half we don't know, right? We have trends, but the only place we know it is in his area where, boom, we got the whole movement. And then the other complicating factor we talked about a bunch is it's Savannah and Georgia are drawing a lot of it. A lot of it's out of our control, right? Even if we manage, it's like global one, but we can manage all we want. China and Russia don't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, forget about it, right? So I think we need to, that interviews with, let's get a Georgia thing going. So I think there's a number of things, but groundwater's, I mean, did a great job, but limited data, so there's only so much we can do with it.
Right. So when you said we recommend that they complete the study, are you talking about the groundwater modeling that's been put on hold, or just the work that Brooke has been doing?
Groundwater modeling, because she could, I mean, you could come up and slice and dice it more for it, but it's still the same information.
It is, yeah.
So not more comprehensive. We talked in the line about, issues and without more comprehensive information. We don't know how much water is down there and if we're making an impact or not, other than salt water is coming in his area, but that's probably more Savannah drawing that over into his area than the rest of the basin, I would suspect. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
So
what you're suggesting, you don't think this council needs a lot of additional information. You're suggesting, let's make recommendations that, the groundwater modeling continue to be funded and be completed, so we can have a better tool to really look at this.
I would think that would be one, I
Yeah.
think.
And then
With Georgia.
collaboration with
I
Georgia.
think exploring a barrier for saltwater intrusion. Through all kinds of different uses. Yeah. That's everything.
All right, well, I think you got, I know we put some things about reuse. I like to say recycle, well. Yeah, I like that barrier capability and even basin recharge. Sending things back up into the basin to recharge groundwater. Not just the saltwater there.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about strategy.
Some of that stuff.
I guess what I'm asking now, do you need more technical information to be able to recommend strategies? I'm trying not to put the cart before the horse.
On the groundwater side?
On groundwater side, yeah.
I think we need a model, and I think we need more wells. And I think that the amount of data, we're taking the industry and well way over here, and I think there, I don't think.
So
we need more.
Yeah, I've heard a number of recommendations that you'll make that are technical recommendations. You need more monitoring data. So we need more wells. We need the groundwater modeling to be done. We need collaboration with Georgia. So there's 3 recommendations right off the bat.
Saltwater intrusion.
Do you not need Brooke to come back with different information or a presentation of?
I think she has better things to do.
Oh, yeah. Things I can offer, maybe, is my professional opinion is that we probably could have some healthy concern about what's going on in the middle of the basin. If we're looking at agricultural withdrawals increase and we want to make sure that we've got water withdrawal, that it would be a good idea to maybe, like I said, pull some more hydrographs together. I didn't pull all the data. I didn't pull all the data together. We have more periodic pieces. We have more hot maps that, to understand that, but I don't know if that's the presentation that we need to give or just something to work on kind of behind the scenes and say, here's where we are.
So question, do you think that would lead to a different recommendation on ones that we've generically said so far?
I don't necessarily think that it would. I think that we would have a little bit more confidence about where water levels are. Especially broadening your search with thinking about, let's say we have the Crouch Branch aquifer and we want to look at where are all the water levels, over time. We don't have a lot of data to suggest it. So I mean, I can dive into it a little bit more. We can look at individual users water use, now that's a big, that's a big chunk of time to start drilling into individual people, individual, facility users, different wells. I don't know if it would help, so much, but I mean, I think making some broad informed strategies at this point, but I don't think that we should skip over what's going on in the middle of the basin and the deeper aquifers. More monitoring, for sure, and yeah, that's. But if y'all are okay with it, and we can just maybe kind of have a discussion of this and not expect an informal presentation, that works for me.
If I'm correct, Brooke, that if we look at the groundwater situation in the basin, in our planning area, the only area that we can perceive where there is an ongoing, I'll use the word crisis, but that's too broad a term, but an ongoing continuing problem which threatens certain things is really in southern Beaufort County, that area. The other parts of the basin, we don't know enough in many areas, but we don't perceive a crisis in any of the groundwater situations in the other parts of the basin. So in a sense, in terms of action items and things that have to be done, those focuses really are on the Hilton Head, southern Beaufort County, Jasper County areas. And everything else is better data, more wells, et cetera, stuff that will happen over the years, because this process, in theory, is to continue. I mean, after we finish this particular plan, this is not the end. It keeps going, and we keep looking at it. We'll come back and look at all this stuff again in a couple of years. So to me, that becomes the strategy for me for groundwater is how do we get better data? And how do we get better analysis in the areas that we don't understand enough about? And then what things should we be doing and specifying for the areas where we know we've got a problem, and we know long term, if we don't figure out a way to do it, we're all gonna be in trouble. So that's the way I look at it. Okay.
That makes sense.
I would add, let's not forget when we're talking about the model, trying to quantify those unreported uses.
Yes,
Exactly into the.
I wrote that down,
Even if it's just a percentage, or something.
we can look back into some of the conversations that we've had in the past, because this is something that will come up, and I think we do have some numbers that we can just return to it to give some more confidence of what portion of that is unreported.
Yeah,
I
but
gotta be that okay with, like self-supply, residential supply, it's messy, but once you get beyond like smaller farms or ag, I don't know how. I'm not sure how to do that.
I don't think there's much unreported use outside of that. I think it's just domestic use and then small ag, that's below the threshold.
Is there a record of where, of unpermitted wells? Whether or not we have a measure of how much is.
There's a private well database, I wouldn't, the completeness of it isn't.
Yeah,
There's some uncertainties, I think I've looked through some of it, and I know wells that I thought would have been in there, but weren't, and that, I don't know why that happened, but we can plot up wells, we could get that information. I think some of that is a little bit private, because they're at homes and stuff, but we could talk about that with Greg, with him, or private well person.
The approach we've taken before when we're trying to do a water budget like this, quantify unreported uses, not to drill down to individual well record, but just do a GIS analysis where we say, here's the water service area, this utility, everything outside it, it's a domestic, you can go to the census information or GIS information, assign a average per capita demand to each household, multiply it, and you're done. It's very cool.
Something like that.
But then you consider too, are they in a sewer area or not? If it's in septic, a lot of that water is going back to the septic system, and it could be entering back into the groundwater system. So depending on how detailed you want to get the water balance, or you just want to know how much is being pulled out. Anyway, it could be done.
Is there any value to having information on these individual small wells when they need to be deep, or if they go dry. Is that a data point that would be useful to the state? Noting that, you know, my 55-foot, 75-foot, 85-foot well is dry, or I've just had it re-drilled another 35, 40 feet, is that useful?
It can be, so we've actually had folks call us and tell us, like, hey, my private well has gone dry. You know, the water level is falling below my thumb, and then we do have a discussion with them, and we do try to figure out, you know, how deep is your private well? Typically, it's due to, you know, it hasn't rained in a while, and they have a superficial private well, and so it's just due to, it's really hot in the summer and.
Right.
But.
It's anecdotal.
Yeah, but then we've also had cases where, you know, you have areas from some well drillers drilling out wells to those deeper aquifers where we have ag users. And this is where we get into, you know, a managed resource where we would like the private wells to be in that superficial so that we can have, you know, our ag in those like middle aquifers, and then water suppliers and industrial users in those deeper aquifers. But you know, it is useful to get that information, because then we can kind of look around and see what could be causing that.
Is that something this council should consider as one of the data points or suggestions, recommendations?
I mean,
This data is useful, but it's not available, it's not being reported.
yeah, it could be, it'd be really hard to, you know, get that out to folks to have, I mean, they're only gonna tell us when it is a problem. But it isn't something that happens really frequently, and you do have folks that do have their pumps deep enough that never becomes a problem for them. So it's, I don't know how useful it would be.
Okay.
But it'd be interesting.
Okay, so I think what I've heard is that we don't need specific more information from Brooke for the next meeting. That leaves Brooke available to start writing chapter 5, the groundwater. And I guess I suggest that too, because once she puts it down on paper, like she did for the PD, but for this one, I guess you'll have more information you can present, right?
More time.
The PD, you didn't really do it by aquifer, did you, or?
We couldn't do it by aquifer, yeah, it was, there was a lot of cross aquifers and,
Right, so in this case, you've got a couple months instead of a couple weeks.
yeah,
I'll emphasize a couple months, those will pop up pretty quick.
it will.
We're actually kind of getting close to near the end of our planning process. We're kind of getting into phase 4. We're gonna talk about strategies today. We're probably gonna finish that up next month, and then we're gonna work more on recommendations and then an implementation plan. And you know, we talked about the need to kind of pick up our schedule just because of the executive order from the governor and water at sea, and you know, I don't want to rush everybody, but we do want to try to wrap up our report so that your recommendations can get into the state water plan, which is going to be written concurrently this spring and summer and fall as we're writing this plan. So it's the CNT. So, you know, we just want to make sure everything that you come up with as far as a recommendation makes it into the state water plan. All right. So you're good starting to write?
I feel good.
Yeah, that'll be something good to read once we get the groundwater part of chapter 5. We've already got the surface water part drafted, I believe. We're going to start circulating draft chapters probably before the next meeting's only 3 weeks, maybe some of them before the next meeting, but very shortly.
How about the groundwater resources, the water resources chapter, is that, are we working on that as well, the characteristics of the basin, the aquifers, or is that, what is it, chapter 3? Is that?
Chapter 3. Have to look back and see if we've done anything on that.
Okay.
Well, you might need a little bit of assistance from you.
Okay, yeah, we'll get, Andy and I will, yeah, with you, okay.
Okay. Okay, all right, with that in mind, I think I get the feeling that everybody's at least comfortable to start talking about water management strategies, certainly surface water. And we've already talked about a number of groundwater strategies that we know could be useful. So let's start that discussion. Just as a reminder, right in the planning framework, this is how they define both surface and groundwater management strategies. There's a little bit of a difference. surface water, we're not necessarily trying to eliminate a shortage because we didn't really identify any significant shortages in either Salkehatchie or the lower Savannah Basin. But we are trying to increase surface water availability. Keep that in mind. For groundwater management strategies, those are to address a groundwater area of concern or a shortage. Now, technically, we could, maybe we should, formally select or define what we think a groundwater area of concern could be, like the Hilton Head area. Do I have yeah, there's a definition of groundwater area of concern. Area in the coastal plain designated by RDC where groundwater withdrawals from the specific aquifer are causing or are expected to cause unacceptable impacts to the resource for the public health and well-being. Pete, do you think what's going on in Hilton Head meets that definition? Or what's going on because of Savannah meets that definition?
Yeah, I mean, Hilton Head historically, yes, I think was a part of its own problem, but Hilton Head is a victim of the saltwater intrusion. It's sitting there dealing with the saltwater intrusion. It's not, we're going to have public supply there, so. I think on the strategies, if we're going to talk about things like the state supporting the programs, the technological based programs, treatment based programs, the state engaging in the modeling to help the local user identify where it should and shouldn't be trying to develop supply and things like that.
I think of those as recommendations. I make the distinction because we've got chapter 9, which is going to be recommendations like that, and then we've got chapter 6 and 7, which are specific strategies like ASR or conjunctive use, groundwater barrier wall.
I mean, I'll be real honest. I get a little nervous, and I think on behalf of the island, the island shouldn't be put in place of saying your strategy is to accept and use the Savannah River. That comes with a bunch of problems for Hilton Head. Number one is the economics of it. It is extremely expensive. We are in control of it. We're just a customer. And then there's also other issues there. There's PFAS contamination issues. There's drought issues with surface water supply. So I think we have the island. I don't think the island like the word conjunctive to be synonymous with the Savannah River.
Groundwater area of concern, it's already, that basin's already identified, there's already been measures put in place, so it probably, we can say it's ratified based on the presentation, but it already is that.
Because it's a capacity area.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think the planning framework and the PPAC define groundwater area of concern with the idea of the whole coastal plain, which is a capacity use area, as being a groundwater area of concern. I think they were thinking more specific, right?
Yeah,
Scott,
that definition, again, I probably need to tweak it. I think, because I think it's just an area where we know there's water use, we might expect some additional water use, we don't have enough monitoring, it might be a concern. Just kind of pinpoint places in the basin that they're relatively more concerned than others, but it doesn't mean it's like a crisis.
Right.
So this makes it sound like it's almost a crisis. I think that's what's wrong.
The Yellowstone is probably a good example because we had modeling results and we saw that in Calhoun County and
Lexington.
Where?
Lexington.
For the Crouch and the McQueen branch in different spots, there were potential cones of depression that were going to be formed. And we said, yeah, those are areas of concern. And then we said, okay, strategies there might be conjunctive use, switching over surface water, demand side strategies, but definitely monitoring, because we didn't have monitoring in those parts. So let's get out ahead of it, put in some monitoring wells, and that's what they've been working to do. So that's an example where the modeling identified a potential area of concern that we really didn't know about before. In this case, Hilton Head, we know the issue of saltwater intrusion. in my mind, it kind of meets the definition of a groundwater area concern, but
Sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead. Dean.
I would say 30 years ago. Hilton Head was a groundwater area of concern. Right now, it is being actively managed. It is being, there's supplemental supply available, surface water. Sorry, Pete.
Yes.
Savannah. And I don't think that, from our perspective, is a groundwater area of concern anymore. I mean, there's very little we can do that we aren't doing. Now, I think conceivably more of that recharge kind of pushing, but again, that, as she said, in terms of the Fusky and the changes that are occurring there, that may be a groundwater area of concern. Because getting surface water over to the Fusky is probably impossible. But it's not impossible, but it's enormously expensive. So we're gonna have to deal with the Fusky with the resource we have there. There's no additional resource that's gonna be able to go up to the Fusky, so we're gonna have to deal with the problem there. Hilton Head is dealing with all those issues and doing it well, and has been doing it well for decades now. So I don't attribute that to Hilton Head. I do attribute it to the Fusky.
The lowest part of the river, I think is an area, so we don't have to call out on them. Because because the only strategy would be to work with Georgia, because if we don't, we're not doing anything other than watching it happen, right? So the ultimate strategy was build 3 more Hyundai and Kia plants and see what happens. You know, you're right. It's the strategy needs to work with the other side of the river. So if you don't call out an island, it's that whole lower coastal part of our river has a problem. Right. And so the only strategy is to work with the neighbor.
I was just gonna mention, so, you know, we wrapped up the PD and, we also didn't have the model. But we went to the PD, looking at the hot maps, and we could literally point to 2 areas of concern. On the map, one was in Florence and Cambridge, Aquifer, and another was in Georgia, and primary Crawford. And so we defined those maps as areas of concern. And it wasn't until like right when we were writing the plan that the capacity use areas report that they said, hey, no new wells associated with increased withdrawals should go in these areas to prevent, you know, any more declines. And so that is not the same case in this basin. I was not able to look at the maps and say, oh, here's our concern right here. Here we've had declines outside of the coast. Yes, we've had, but that, I mean, we're talking, we've already said that that's not an area of concern. It's an area that's undergoing management. And if it was a concern, and now you're doing everything we can to keep active monitoring going on. And there's a cap of water use from the aquifer. No, there's not a cap outside of the island. The Fusky does use a lot of water, but they don't use as much. But they do use a lot of water per capita. But I could say that in all of the aquifers, it appears that the decline in the basin is not outside of like a kind of a regular, you know, margin of error, regular down decline in the aquifer. So maybe we don't define an area of concern as an idea, but like kind of work around that language. And you know, maybe not use language quite as strong to talk about more monitoring, but to not make it, because we don't have the data right now to support that would be an area of concern. So but you know, that's how I picked it, that's how we looked at it before, and we just don't have the same, you know, it's not apples to apples here.
So you mentioned the middle of the basin though.
I did mention the middle of the basin because we don't have enough wells. We are projected to see an increase of agricultural irrigation, and some of the work that Alex Pellet had done previously when he was with us, he did look at the expansion of irrigated area. And as was brought up earlier today, that's something that are there more farms going in? Are they pulling more water? Is it expanding? Is there room for them to expand? Is it going to be more water from established farms, or are we going to have more agriculture move into the basin if there's room for it? So I just don't want
from my analysis of looking at, you know, the current use. I don't want to overstep and make y'all feel that we should designate that as an area of concern, but instead investigate it more so that we could have some more clarity as we moved into, when we could model it, and then we could say, you know, in a future iteration thing, oh, well, look, this did become an area of concern. Based on the projections and based on what used to happen, so, that's just my 2 cents there, and I'm sure you agree.
Yeah, I do. Outside the code, I'm not sure I see a lot to support designated area of concern, but I'm not on the council, that's like y'all. But certainly, you know, there's places we need for monitoring, so it's up to y'all how y'all want to touch the recommendations there, but we're not trying to tie these to we designate areas of concern.
That's
We're not doing it. I'm not trying to do that.
Okay.
I'll say if this is helpful, one thing our group could do is look at. In this basin, it's like, if this is interesting on the groundwater side, like, when we get new applications. We can let y'all know, like, are the new applications we're getting, you know. The same facility asking for more water, or is it a brand new facility coming in? Like, we can look at that and give y'all that information. I mean, the most recent groundwater evaluation talks about that somewhat, but you know, with the low country one not being since 21, we can get some more information on that if that is helpful. Because I know yesterday we got an application for, I believe, Colleton County for an additional well for additional ag use from a current user. So it's not like a new farm going in, it's the same farmer getting more water. So we can get that information if it's helpful.
Okay. Okay, like when we write up chapter 6 and 7, I want to be able to write whether you all consider any areas of groundwater area of concern. I think Bill's suggestion was that the whole Georgia coastal area potentially would be an area of concern because we've seen.
Listen to them. If it doesn't meet the bar, it doesn't meet the bar.
Well, I mean, certainly it's an area where groundwater withdrawals from a specified aquifer are causing unacceptable impacts. There's a cone of depression and those impacts are causing salt water to migrate and impact wells. So I think it definitely meets the definition. I think we're going to talk about strategies that are already in place, like ASR, to help address that area of concern. So in that regard, we're following the planning framework.
John, do we put it, if we look at that area, do we limit it to a groundwater area of concern? Or do we broaden it to look at a general water resource area of concern for the state of South Carolina? It would include the impacts on groundwater as well as the concern about the availability, long-term availability of surface water. Because of things, particularly what George is doing in the basin, and talks about doing in the basin, that it's and which then takes the recommended actions on a more broader basin and says we've got to sit down with Georgia and we've got to sort this out. I mean, if you limit it to groundwater, then you're limiting it to one area. But if you put it on put the whole thing together, then it says, hey, we've got to sit down with Georgia and work on all these issues relative to the surface water demand and supply and the well water demand.
I think that's a good suggestion. Scott?
I was going to say, for surface water, there is the reach of interest. I don't know if we talked about that much.
We did, yeah.
It's kind of the same idea on the surface water side. So
right. So in your example and what you're suggesting is that the coastal Georgia Savannah area is not only a groundwater concern, the Savannah River is a reach of interest for a number of reasons. And, you know, it's a shared water resource, both ground and surface water, and we need solutions that address both. We can write it up that way. That kind of makes sense. That makes sense to everyone else? Yeah, okay. That'll be the approach. Okay. I think last week I circulated the notes that we took when we did some brainstorming about existing strategies in the basin. What strategies could be expanded, what strategies were effective, that type of thing. So I just want to quickly review that to refresh this in your memory as we decide to select and identify strategies for inclusion in our plan. On the supply side, we talked about water recycling, water reuse, reclaimed water, they're all kind of synonymous. And the examples where that's happening in Hilton Head and Beaufort Jasper and other places. That's golf and ag mentioned, stormwater collection ponds, and they use that for irrigation. We talked about conjunctive use. There's great examples with golf courses, with ags, with public supply, even with energy for conjunctive use. And again, if y'all don't know, conjunctive use is using both surface and groundwater. Interconnections and regionalization, interbasin transfers, we recognize that's already occurring, ASR. In this case, it's treating surface water and putting it back into the ground. There could be another form of ASR that's not yet permitted and allowed, which is treating wastewater to higher quality and then putting it into the ground. But right now, there's no regulation in place to do that. Is that something that the Water Reuse Committee is talking about? Helping develop regulations around that? Yeah.
Indirect potable reuse.
And indirect potable reuse, yeah. On-site retention, that's kind of the same thing as stormwater collection. The Army Corps already has a flow strategy and minimum releases from Thurman that manage the Savannah River system. Someone mentioned aerial or satellite detection programs. I know a number of utilities in the upstate have done that to help identify leaks in their distribution systems and then demand management. So those are some of the supply side ones. Demand side, we'll get into those others. We had a whole list there. I want to read through them. For both golf courses, public supply, and then ag. Effectiveness of existing strategies. It was mentioned, reclaimed water is very effective for Hilton Head. Regionalization is effective in terms of improving technical and financial capacity. I don't remember the discussion around this bullet. Outreach is not effective relative to other issues, example, electric energies. Don't I remember why we said that? What the discussion was there?
I'm sorry, John. I have slide. What that mean? Building code requirements, utilities that get water.
Building code requirements, facilities that get water from Beaufort. Oh, I think, is Brian on?
Yes.
Yeah, Brian, didn't you bring up the fact that Beaufort Jasper as a wholesaler of water has requirements, building code requirements? There's something that you mentioned. He may be online, but walked away from his desk or something. Well, I'll have to check back with him. That was something he mentioned, and maybe when I put the notes down, it wasn't correct, but I remember he chimed in with a specific example that was along the line of building code requirements. We'll come back to that.
So.
Does anyone remember the outreach is not effective discussion? Just taken out of context, I'm wondering why we said that, but there was an example somebody gave.
I think it was about like conservation, encouraging conservation is not effective.
It's not effective.
I remember correctly, it was something.
I think there was something because as the relative to other issues,
Yeah.
you can get your peak alerts in texts or emails, and there's a separate kind of thing
That's
for
right.
electricity,
Right.
but not so much for water. I think
That's what the discussion was. Yeah, the electric folks tell you your monthly use in these nice graphs now and what your projected use might be given forecasted
And
weather
if there's a
conditions.
peak alert, you get
Right.
a notification in the moment. So
Exactly.
Our utility does.
It wasn't effective.
Yeah.
We do that.
Do you do like what your neighbor's using kind of thing?
Yeah, we can, we have an online portal, you get an alert how much you use, you can set thresholds. Yeah.
And do you think that's been effective in
Oh,
helping identify leaks that they might not otherwise know about?
Yes.
Yeah.
And public communication to the customer is generally effective, I would say as well, just on getting that to concern.
Okay.
We had a thing, Beaufort Jasper had to shut down its plant a couple weeks ago. And so ourselves and them You know, just immediate things, so there's social media and like news media. Ask people, hey, don't irrigate these 2 days, next week, kind of thing, those dramatic.
Yeah.
They listened to them. I mean, you know, we looked the next day, wow, they didn't. You know, so.
That may be.
I would generally, I would disagree with that comment, but I don't know.
I wasn't the one who made it, but I remember the conversation. I think they're saying that's not widespread.
Probably, yeah.
I think you're right.
But it's a strategy conceivably, if done correctly.
Oh, yeah.
Will work.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I think.
Wouldn't be effective.
What Pete's saying, it is effective, right? Okay. Okay, we talked about can existing strategies be expanded? We talked about the potential for reclaimed water, where it makes sense, you know, location is important for reclaimed water. You don't want to have to pipe it 50 miles away or anything, so. There's comments about, you know, having enough water to support and promote industrial growth and leveraging reclaimed water where it makes sense. All existing strategies can be expanded. Prioritizing them is important. We're going to try to prioritize strategies that we come up with to the extent that we can. It may be, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it may just be these are high priority, these are low priority, but we'll discuss that. Holding to and enforcing existing standards is important. State funding is needed. We recognize that. And then we talked about the groundwater barrier wall. And then we kind of wrapped it up with what strategies are relevant in the two basins and should be further evaluated. There was recognition that ag is already doing a really good job with water efficiency. And we heard that actually at the listening session earlier this week. Public water supply, we've got a number of things there that we'll talk about. Demand side strategies, preventing leaks, leak detection, conservation, more funding, and lobbying for federal dollars. So hopefully that refreshes your brains, what we talked about before. Before we get into this discussion, there's some things I want to try to remember is that when we're selecting strategies, we're doing it kind of basin wide. And we have to remember that every water user is different, every utility is different. Strategies may work for some, but not for others. Also, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we've already talked about uncertainties today. It's come up in multiple discussions regarding uncertainty around population projections and per capita demands. Is that going to flatten out now or continue to decline? Those are just two. So we're going to talk a little bit about adaptive management and how we might want to identify strategies that we may not need now, but we might need 20 years from now if conditions change beyond what we've forecasted. So let's do that first before we get into strategies. Here's a definition of adaptive management that we often use in the water resource world. It's a framework that can be used to implement options as the future unfolds in a structured way to avoid pitfalls of either underperformance or overinvestment. So you want to identify strategies that you can put in place if a specific trigger happens, like say you get this mega drought, right? Unexpected drought that hasn't happened in the last 90 years, but suddenly it's the worst drought of record and we didn't plan for it and we need to put something in place to address it. So you might have some strategies that are in your back pocket to address that risk. Now, that strategy might be, I don't know, spending millions of dollars to build a new reservoir. Well, you don't want to spend $1 million to build that reservoir if you don't need to. So that's where the kind of underperformance, overinvestment part comes in. You want to have something lined up that you can apply if needed, but you don't want to spend the money on that unless you need it. So there's a balance there. So what are some of the uncertainties that you think are important in your river basin? And I'm going to start with one that we talked about, climate, right? We don't know what the weather's going to be like a month from now, let alone 5, 10, 30, or 50 years from now at the end of our planning horizon. You know, we know temperatures have been increasing. We know precipitation's been up and down, but it seems to be coming less frequently, but in higher amounts. Joey mentioned that he got 3 large rain events, but they were spread out over months, right? And that impacts how you use water. So climate is certainly one uncertainty. What are other uncertainties?
growth of our neighboring state.
Neighboring states.
Growth in general population growth.
But we have a little more idea of how we're changing. We have an idea of our neighbors.
And specifically growth in those states or
Well,
regulation?
water use, growth in water use
What else?
and growth.
Our population growth.
So both economic and population growth. What other uncertainties could impact water resource availability?
Industry. All of what we've mentioned, I think in the last 3 meetings, potential. Water users in building.
Yeah, so,
Like
right, what,
power plants or. Automobile plants or. Who's building what over there.
okay,
New demand sources.
new demand sources, I'm saying, with respect to industry.
There's a clear uncertainty with groundwater. We don't have enough wells, we don't have enough data to know what's happening.
Yeah.
There's uncertainty there.
Data unknowns. Specifically,
What about quality related issues that might impact quantity availability?
Regulation. That's the only thing.
What about like PFAS or some other emerging contaminant that could be incredibly expensive to treat and remove? That considered uncertainty that might impact?
Say again?
Bill? PFAS or another emerging contaminant we don't even know about that could, you know.
That probably ties in with regulation. I think you could expand that one, regulation and
I don't know, I
politics and governance.
I feel like regulation, politics, and then like PFAS and quality are different because
Yeah, but
quality
nobody is gonna spend the money to deal with PFAS unless they are regulated and forced to do it.
I know what it is, but I think quality is an important step that you're just. I'm kind of skirting, but PFAS which fit in there too, like there's gonna be some quality issues that could be impactful.
Sure, and what if there's a spill, Savannah River or something?
Which would feed into regulation, but I don't think that should also be encompassed there.
Yeah, there could certainly be some short-term quality impacts like releases or spills that affect
Or the
availability.
saltwater inundation issue that could become major. I mean. I feel like quality should happen.
Any others? Pretty good comprehensive list.
Is climate inclusive of drought? Is that when you say climate?
I considered it part of that. I mean, I guess you could look at it, just changing climate patterns, but also separately, mega drought or something, just happens.
But also overages, I mean, short periods of overage. Would be included in climate, right?
Overages.
Like excess.
Floods.
Excess
Flooding.
flooding, yeah,
Floods,
surge,
yeah,
excess
yeah.
surface flooding.
Yeah. Okay,
Not always, there's something more water rich state. Or a water rich basin of waste.
yeah, I heard natural disasters, that's a good one. The example John was telling me about this morning, which I didn't realize, is all the fires out in LA, well, they're starting to run out of water to put them out. So, I mean, you run out of water, you've got a fire problem and you don't have water, so you've got a double public health issue.
Being from there just doesn't matter. You can't. Can't put out an 80-mile-an-hour wind fire.
Yeah.
With any, because the water you drop goes that way, so it doesn't matter.
You can see it happening if you watch the video.
No, chemicals are more effective than water.
Spray PFAS all over it.
It's just got.
That's what we did today.
Yeah, that's what those military helicopters are good at.
Rhinoceros, small.
All right, let's see how good we did here. And these little octagons are often ones that are important to water resource planning, population growth, climate, and agricultural output. So uncertainty about, maybe there's a new type of crop, not a new type of crop, but a big demand on corn all of a sudden. Corn's a more water intensive use, probably the most, right? So what if, suddenly, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but ethanol became very valuable. So everybody starts growing more corn, they need to irrigate that corn. That's an uncertainty.
But think about it in a little different way. If you look at what's happening in the West with the droughts, the Colorado River down, all kinds of other things. South Carolina becomes a pretty appealing place if you're a significant agricultural industry and you decide we've got to find a place where we can grow, where we have some reasonable expectation that we're going to have rainfall.
Right.
All of a sudden, South Carolina, I'm just driving up here, looking at the fields, but also looking at the woodland. It could be chopped down, turned into fields. I mean, to me, that's always been a bit of a concern here. That we're at a point of being very appealing to huge agricultural operations that need a place flat, good soil, potential rainfall, rainwater around.
Right.
That's one of those things that bothers me and worries me.
Right.
Yeah, we have all this heirs property and people that don't live here that own it, that just don't even keep it anymore, so now the state's busy trying to clear it, it's not. Their title, get it, their title, get it.
Technology changes, municipal water use, that's demands, innovation diversions, regulatory, unplanned outages, natural disasters, economic conditions, water treatment level, that's related to regulation. So I think you covered pretty much all those uncertainties. So we talk about this because we want you to think about those uncertainties as you're identifying strategies, right? What strategies are more effective in addressing some of these uncertainties? Keep that in the back of your mind. We're not really developing an adaptive plan because we don't have shortages that we're trying to address now or projected into the future necessarily, but we want to have a toolbox of strategies that could address potential water issues. Okay, so oh gosh, it's almost already 2. Well, I don't know that it's worth actually starting this discussion. Let's at least preview discussion, and we'll pick this up in 3 weeks.
Actually, 4 weeks.
4 weeks?
I just checked it out.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there's 5.
January is long.
Oh, I have one extra month. Okay, that's right, actually. All right.
The first is like on a Friday.
All right.
And I will be here next, so you'll go out.
Well, I want you to send me your thoughts and ideas ahead of the meeting.
You can put them on the screen.
Put them on the screen. Yeah.
No, you don't want me to do that.
Before midnight.
Tom, don't before midnight, yeah. Tom, lots of events.
Yeah. So let's just at least talk about what's already in use, and then I want to pose these questions to you to think about moving forward. What we know is already in use is water reuse, recycled water, and reclaimed wastewater for effluent irrigation. Very effective down on Hilton Head and Beaufort Jasper. On-site retention of stormwater. If example, of course, is also for ag, and comments are very important. Conjunctive use, interconnections and regionalization, interbasin transfers, aquifer storage and recovery. Those are all supply side strategies that are already in use. Any of them could be expanded. Some of them sure will be. Think about whether we need any additional supply side strategies. We've talked about recommendations like collaboration with Georgia. But I'm thinking more of physical structures or how you move water around. That type of thing. And then think about should any of these strategies be prioritized, and that just may mean we're emphasizing this strategy over the rest of them because we think we'll need to do it more, like ASR or water reuse. I don't know. Just give examples. So how do we want to prioritize them? Are there any other supply side strategies? And then which ones are potentially most useful in adapting to changing conditions? So that's the discussion around supply side strategies. We'll then kind of go through and talk about the demand side strategies. And each sector has a kind of a toolbox of strategies, and we want to identify which ones are important for each sector. So for ag, that's why I wanted Joey here today. Joe, I want you to think about, are all of these useful and effective, and you'd recommend them for growers in the lower Savannah-Salkehatchie? We've asked that question to other farmers in the other RBCs. Most of the time they said, yeah, those are all used, and depending on your operation, any one of them may be useful. I think only in an instance or two did we actually cross some off.
Yeah, all of those you except the one with
the golf courses. Yeah, I didn't want to leave golf courses out, so I put them on there. But you're saying all of these are used and
we use all of them on.
Yeah, okay. And then I want to know, should any of these, or would you recommend any of these be prioritized one over the other? So like Landon Weathers and Jerry Walter and the Edistos, they kind of actually ranked the ones they thought were most useful for improving water efficiency. And they started with water audits and nozzle retrofits, and they said everybody should be doing that, every 5 years or 10 years or something. Would that be what you recommend too?
I would agree, and the cover crop, and whenever you're plant into that cover crop instead of destroying it. Because when you get rainfall and when you irrigate, it holds that water in there better. It won't evaporate because that's kind of like an insulation barrier from the sun sucking it back out.
Right.
Because the sun's not shining on the bare surface.
Okay, so you think those two, soil management, cover cropping, and water audits and nozzle retrofits are a higher priority of all of the rest of those, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the kind of feedback we're looking for from each sector, is which ones are most useful, which ones improve water efficiency the most, and are applicable to the basin. For water conservation efficient strategies for municipal, we've got a list that's by no means exhaustive, but these are some of the strategies, strategies that we've talked about before. In the Saluda and Upper Savannah, they crossed off some of these because they said, you know what, there's not much need to push this, like a toilet rebate program. Like, yeah, that's come and gone. Any new toilets you get now are efficient. There's not a lot of old 5-gallon per flush toilets out there. We don't need to do a toilet rebate program. That's where you turn your old toilet in and you get a rebate to buy a new one. So they crossed that off. Car wash recycling ordinances, they crossed that off. They said, that's not a significant enough issue. Out west and other places it is, they require, in Atlanta, they require a certain percentage of your car wash water, public facility or a gas station or whatever, to be recycled. So that's just an example of some of the strategies that other basins felt weren't important. So think about that as well. We'll also talk about energy and industry. And that's it. We're going to have that discussion to kind of select which strategies we want to promote in the plan. Everybody understand the charts there? Again, these aren't exhaustive lists of demand side strategies. If there's other ones that you think are effective, we want to hear about them.
John, would you get these lists forwarded to us?
Yes. So a lot of these were in that technical memo that I circulated exactly on the demand side, but I'll send these slides out after the meeting along with Brooke's slides, And I'll probably provide links to the groundwater evaluation studies that Leanne referenced, if we have all that together. Okay, so for the next meeting, I don't think we're gonna need to do much follow-up on groundwater. We are gonna finalize our discussion of water management strategies. We'll probably reserve an hour and a half for that. And then we'll probably dive more into plan recommendations, and we'll continue to discuss plan recommendations in March. Hopefully by the end of March, we'll have worked through all the recommendations we want to include. And we'll start working on the implementation plan, which is just taking our recommendations and figuring out how can we make these recommendations. Whether, who's responsible, is it gonna cost something, how do we prioritize these, what's more important? So if we can stay on schedule and finish up the implementation plan by April, we may have a draft of the plan ready by June or so, but that also means we're gonna start to send out a lot of chapters for y'all to review in the next several months. Okay, I went through a whole bunch there, but any concerns or questions about what we've got to do the next 4 or 5 months? As far as the meeting location, in 4 weeks, we'll be in touch. We may go back to Hampton and Carrie's looking into a church. So they may have a space for us. We may come back here, but we'll let you know.
I'm looking at that place in Ridgeland.
And there's a place in Ridgeland that I think Kathy, you mentioned to us. If you have any other ideas, Kathy, too, let us know. Yeah.
We know how it's in place.
What about Waldeboro?
How it's in place, the.
That's so wild, that's a short drive for me.
Well, that part's booked,
The school.
there's something with the school that gonna be.
I don't mind.
There's a hiccup with it, I can't remember what it was. But I'll check, to make sure that, or maybe what it is.
They went on the cliff.
They say-
I didn't know. I think we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, yes.
Joe.